like your kid's probably not going to have as good a time as the person who did. And I think that what's happening is a lot of parents, or what's happening in the schools, is that, and I'm speaking like as third person as you can get. I don't have kids and I'm not involved in the school system, but just as what I've seen, it feels like the people who relied on the system aren't doing as well as the people who took responsibility and didn't rely on the system, as a general rule. Yeah, certain demographics.
I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks.
Yeah,
I'ma stack bricks up,
like my
what I want to make.
I got a lot of shit to say, so I'ma do this every day. I'll be writing things until I'm fucking buried in my grave.
An RTMP server, so it's like there's one additional step. It was original from browser to you guys, and now there's one additional step, which I think ultimately, I don't know how much of a delay it adds, but not as bad as it's been lately. It'll probably tighten up as it gets better. So they'll be able to reduce whatever that's called, latency. Flash says, when you have time, if you want to laugh, click on the link I provided for Joe tripping. All right, we'll take a look at that, Flash. I don't like to. We'll see what it looks like. Here, you should never depend on the system. The government usually makes a situation. They're having you be a quality assurance manager for free. Forget that. Well, I really want it. I really want RTMP. So I'm happy to assist. If it will accelerate the deployment, I'm happy to assist. This old guy says they executed the search warrant about a year ago. Biden's been holding Menendez in his pocket to use as a distraction when handy for Hunter. That's kind of what it feels like, right? It's just like they just pulled it out. Like red card, boom. We need him now. Let's drag this puppy out and change the story. What's up, Frank? Crisp that bacon on one of those taco racks, baby, on one of those metal holding trays. Crispy tacos. You have to figure out how to keep those from getting soggy. Yeah, soggy tacos are not very, very fun at all. You're right. Unless they're kind of a soft taco, but then they're not really soggy. They're just soft. Breakfast tacos, delicious stuff. Americans have poor math skills. It's a threat in standing to the global economy. Yeah, I don't want to talk about math skills. Okay. Let me see if I can find this clip on. I thought I might have saved it. Oh, yeah, I did save it. Okay, so I saw this from Cernovich, since we're talking a little education stuff. Here is, and it feels like they're all covering it up, right? So this is education. This is what I saw on education. So this is from Victoria, and I think these are like lefty people. Okay, so like these are not like right wingers or anything. And so this is Victoria. She's on Twitter. She's apparently a teacher. Her name's Victoria, and she's responding to this guy's response. And I watched this, and I was like, uh-oh, this is not good at all.
I teach 7th grade. They are still performing on the 4th grade level.
It would benefit you to watch his entire video because he breaks it down about how, like, and that's the kids that are doing well. Because I also teach 7th grade, and we have kids that have math grade level equivalents of 1st and 2nd grade, 3rd grade, many at 4th grade, very few at grade level, very few, if any, in some classes. These kids can't read. They can't decode. They have no vocabulary, no background knowledge. I've never seen anything like it. For context, for 8 years, I taught a self-contained program for significant language-based learning disabilities. Like, it was the most restrictive environment. It was the step before being sent to a specialized school. And my 5th graders with significant language-based learning disabilities could write better than non-disabled 7th graders can now. They can't write a sentence. They don't know what state they live in. They don't know what region of the country they're in. They have no background knowledge. Most of them don't know who the president is.
Whoa.
You know, they're coming to school with no background knowledge, They have very low skills. And yes, part of my job is to help them find those skills. And as a special education teacher, like I'm obviously going to be working with students who require specialized instruction, but I'm not talking about specifically my students. I'm talking about students in the grade, period. And this was the case last year. They can't take notes. They can't even attend to a video. They can't even attend to a 3-minute video clip. I can play it. I can tell them what it's going to be about. I can summarize what the video did, and not a single one can tell me what the video was about.
It's crazy. Gone. Brains.
Directions written on the board, stated by the classroom teacher, restated by me. All right, who can tell me what we just said? Crickets. They have no listening skills, no reading skills, no writing skills, and no math skills. And like this creator said, I've had them for 30 days. Not even, this is week 4.
It's awful. I mean, like, those kids, man, are at such a disadvantage, and
LVA.
It's just incredible. And I was trying to find the other guy's video, the guy who actually she was responding to, because it's like heartbreaking. It's like, oh my gosh. And what are they doing about it? Nothing. They're just passing them on. And I'm trying to find that other guy's video, man, because his was also good. And he just says they just keep passing them through. They just, nope, no, you're great. Just move along, move along, move along. Everybody's just passing it off. And anyways, let's see if it's here. Yeah, here's this guy's. So same story from this guy.
A moment to debrief. No, y'all, can we talk about it? Can we please talk about it? Let's take a moment to discuss. Let's take a moment to debrief. Let's take a moment to unpack. So I'm not really understanding why they're not telling y'all. Like, we all know that the world is behind, like, globally, like, because of the pandemic and stuff. But I don't understand why they're not stressing to y'all how bad it is. Like, I'm not even trying to be funny, but these kids are, I'm going to just say this. I teach 7th grade. They are still performing on the 4th grade level. I don't care how you flip it, turn it, swing it. They still performing on 4th grade level. Ain't nobody talking about how they just keep moving, passing them on. They just keep passing them on. I can put as many zeros in this grade because I want to. They're going to move that child to 8th grade next year.
Crazy.
But ain't nobody talking about that. Why they not talking about that? Why they not telling y'all that y'all
not everybody else's problem?
And why don't y'all know that y'all kids not performing on their grade level? Why y'all don't know this? Why y'all don't know? Talk about it. Let's unpack. Because y'all be quick to talk about, oh, the teacher this, the teacher this, the teacher. It's your job, baby. I just got here 30 days ago. She was performing on the 4th grade level since 4th grade.
3 years gone.
Why we not talk? Well, let's talk about it.
No, you can't.
You the teacher. You supposed to be, again, she's been on the 4th grade level since the 4th grade. We in 7th grade now. So you let this child go 3 years and you never knew that your child was still in the 4th grade, ain't never left. Hang it up, flex. The 4th grade is being nice. I still have kids performing on grade K, 1, 2, and 3rd grade level. I can probably count on one hand how many kids are actually performing on their grade level. So just imagine, you don't know that your child been on the 2nd grade level since the 2nd grade, and they now in the 7th or 8th grade.
Wild.
Are you joking right now? And these are future leaders, our future doctors, our future nurses.
No, they're not.
Please.
No, they're not. That's the point. Like, they're not. Like, what's going to happen to all of these people? What's going to happen, man? It's not going to work out well for anybody. They're not going to be able to do anything. Like, universal basic income is going to have to be a thing. It's going to be, they're going to be, what are we going to do with a whole group of non-productive people? Like, that whole contingent is going to be a generation. It's awful. It's a really awful thing. Is he saying the 4th? I don't know what I think it was 4th. Yeah, but we got different accents. Spondog says you're right about that. My wife says that students are never held back. She has to pass them on, even if they're not proficient at any subject. Just get them out. I taught for 45 years, says Larry. It's so sad. Nothing about education is for the betterment of children. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. Sweet Potatoes in the house says parents are all tired from working 2 jobs to make the bills, so they hand their kid a tablet or Miss Rachel. It's nuts. Oh my gosh, that is such a horrific thing. I can imagine that totally. Yeah, I can imagine that. Or what are parents supposed to do now? They can't afford to feed their kids. Star says, I taught 7th grade 10 years ago. Is bad then. Crash says, homeschooling. My boys are pursuing a corporate way of getting my grandkids into a private environment. Small private environment, from Crash. Yeah, Sweet says it's hard to afford life and also to homeschool. A lot of people can't afford to better their own kids. Oh, yeah, it's a heartbreaking thing. And I don't really know what the answer is other than getting the government out of it. 51K says it's the technology. They have no need to remember anything. I swear it's purposely turning everybody's brain into dead sheep. The TikTokification of America is what you're saying. Everybody's attention span is just gone. Brains are turned into mush. I think that there is some technology problems about this. I was having a conversation with a friend, and she was telling me about her daughter and about relationships, about her kids and about relationships. We were talking about relationships and about how some of her kids have not been in relationships at all. And they were, a little older, like probably should have been in a relationship or two. And I was thinking that is weird. And I'm like, are they interested in it? Like, not really, just not interested in it at all. I'm like, wow, that's wild. And we were talking about that. Like, why is that? Is it because of social media? Is it because, like, I remember being in high school, like, man, I, couldn't stop thinking about girls, and college too. And it's like, wow, that's not a thing anymore. Like, her kids just weren't really into it. Both sides, both genders. I'm thinking this is weird. And just huge portions of people are not, not going out, not engaging in relationships. And why is it? Is everybody just so stressed out? Everybody's just redlining, just, is it narcissism? Is it whatever it is? It's bad, right? And then if you get a bunch of people who are also uneducated, they can't provide for themselves. Bad situation. Crash says, the business of taking phone calls is a two-edged sword. Be careful. Be very careful, says Crash. Yeah, that's true. That is true. You can take some pretty bad phone calls over the days. What's up? We got a nice dono. Hey, K-Bean's in the house. What's up, K-Bean? Shared this one from Dolphin Fan. Says, Rob, Taco Tuesday is overrated. Gosh. Buy yourself an extra large pineapple ham pizza. LOL. Have a blessed day, everyone. Thanks, Dolphin. If somebody delivered me a pineapple ham pizza, I don't even know what I'd do. Probably, I was going to say, give it to a homeless person, but what would they do with that? They'd probably be offended and stab me. So I'd probably just have to put it right in the garbage where it belongs, now that I think about it. Probably right. All right. Thank you, Dolphin Fan. Fun comment. Pineapple pizza day. Even the homeless guy wouldn't want it. All right. So thank you for that. I love it. Try not to get stabbed out here. All right. Jerry says those that call for school choice need to understand that it will make the education system worse. You think so, Jerry? I don't know. What's the solution then? I don't know. I think at some point I'd like to have kids, and probably needs to, be sooner rather than later. But I start thinking about that, like school and all that. Like, do I need to have infrastructure? Like, do I have to set up a K through 12 school for my kids, in order to have them not be, grown into little insane lunatics? The world's changing pretty dramatically. It's not like you just, there's not a nice little system that everybody goes through. And maybe that's for the better, actually. Maybe the system wasn't so good. High school will work like college. Once all seats are filled, no more admittance, says Jerry. Interesting. Saintly Beginning says, homeschooling is affordable. I use Homeschool Connections. which offers a pre-recorded bundle of all 3rd through 12th grade courses. Published authors, NASA engineers offer all their skills, $440. That sounds awesome. Yeah, it sounds awesome. I mean, the homeschool thing sounds actually great. Like, I didn't really, I liked school because I like learning and I like new things and I liked all the stuff. I mean, let me say that again. There were some parts of school that I liked. There was a large part of it that I did not like. And I thought it was a giant waste of time, and I was irritated that I was there. And I could have been doing something a lot more fruitful with my time, no doubt about it. And that applies to every bit of education I've ever had. Okay, law school included. A huge part of it was a giant waste of time relative to the skill set that I'm learning now. But they charge you for it. Definitely paid for all that education. If you know what I mean. Nikki says, I'm so glad my girls are adults. They will not put their babies in public school. Yeah, they're still 1 and 2. Yeah, I mean, you're going to have a different experience. Sweet Potato says, please hook me up with homeschooling info if anyone does that. I'm going to be doing that, hell or high water. Yeah. Sweet, you got a little one over there, right? And I don't know when you start homeschooling. I think you still have a little bit of time on that, probably, if I remember right. But certainly, right, there's a lot of that going on right now. And I think a lot of people are moving that direction. Like, if you look at even Google Trends, here, let's just do that little experiment while we're here. Google Trends for homeschooling. Let's just see what it shows us. And see if we can. Of course, we're on Bing. So let's do it this way. And let's just see if more people are interested in it over the years. Homeschool.
Hey, Anna. Good morning.
Interest over time. Not in the past day. Let's do the past 5 years.
This is probably going to be a short stream, so we're of him.
Actually, it hasn't changed much at all.
Hey, Chopper. Then we're going to
Here's
watch
what it looks like from my end.
Russell.
Interest over time. I was expecting to see more of an upward trend on that.
Jimmy Dore was
but let's see. Maybe it's just. It looks pretty consistent, although. What is this? Yeah, so we got some changes. I think it's just showing us like as a percentage. Like, look at that. There was a big spike right around COVID. That's the COVID spike right there. Everybody was searching aggressively. So I think they might be showing it like as a relative number, like relative to, so it doesn't look as dramatic on our end. But I have seen some stats that it's really going up. Like, a lot of people are actively pulling their kids out of the schools, and people are concerned that it's going to have a, yeah, I wouldn't trust Google either. People are having concerns that it's going to actually, kind of buckle the system. Like, if more people keep pulling their kids out of the schools, it's going to actually cause them to not have as much funding and all the things coming in. Saintly Beginnings.
Love it.
Says, my now 15-year-old didn't quite figure out reading until she was 10. It's hard. Reading came easy for my oldest. We slowly work with phonics and then the key unlocked. She loves reading now as an honors English. It's amazing how that works, isn't it? Yeah, I had a tough time. With stuff until I started getting confidence. Like, once you start getting a little confidence under your belt, it really started to help me. I was like, oh, I can do math. And then once somebody said that you can do math, it's like, oh, okay, then I can figure it out. Then it's easy. Like, a lot of it was confidence for me. And I don't know if that's still, if that was just me or if that's a thing. I think it might be a thing. A pool buddy is a retired teacher, says big issue is trying to mainstream disruptive and mentally, emotionally challenged kids in the same class. She spent most of her time dealing with them. Yeah, I would bet that that's probably the case, right? It's probably the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle. 80% of the problems come from 20% of the kids. And then of those 20%, of those 20, the same Pareto principles apply. All right, so of the 20% of those 20 are really the big problems. But you can't really deal with those kids. in the way that you might want to, like just throw them out of school. Word says, I homeschooled my kids in the 80s when it was just starting to be a thing. It was really hard. Very few resources or support to be had. Over time, though, learning communities have grown. Curricula are way better and more varied. It's still not easy, but there's so much support available than ever before. That's great. Yeah. And that's a nice little word of encouragement, I think, for Sweet Potato and others in the house who might be interested in it. There is a lot going on. And I think that there's, you know, there's like there's another framework, I think, called Montessori, right? Like Montessori is not, I think it's like a brand name, but there's no, what's the other one called? You know who's doing this? Is this guy called Tucker Max. Here, let me see if I can find this real quick.
Yeah.
So on X, they're setting up Waldorf School. Is that the name of it? Waldorf. That just popped in my head for some reason.
I blew up kick last night.
Waldorf
Monday
School.
Night Football on there.
Is that something? What is a Waldorf school? Yeah, this might be it. Let me see what this is. Waldorf education says it's based on an educational philosophy. It's an educational style. Come on, Wikipedia. The first school opened in 1919. They faced controversy because the guy was a racist, apparently. All right. But is the school, yeah, look at this. Growth of the schools worldwide. See, look at this. Like, these are the numbers that I was, like, this kind of like exponential growth, right? Up and to the right. Growth of Waldorf schools. The name is now trademarked. It's an educational method. I don't know much about it, all right, other than I think that a lot of people are doing it. Elementary. It depends on, like, some of this, right? Temperament, teacher-kid temperament, teacher-kid independence of character, habits, to develop good habits, develop memory. Says engaging young children in abstract intellectual activity too early might actually impact their growth. So it emphasizes cultivating children's emotional life and their imagination. Connect more deeply with subject matter. The core curriculum includes language arts, mythology, history, geography, algebra, geometry, mineralogy, biology, nutrition. Wait a minute. Is there racial justice in here? Wait a minute. I don't see racial justice in here, or equity, or environmental catastrophe. That's weird. The school day generally begins with a 1.5 to 2 hour cognitively oriented main lesson. Anyways, so like there's frameworks for this, right? 4 temperaments, cognitive, emotional, behavioral development. And a curriculum. So like you could look, you know, there's like methods, in other words. Like you could say, hey, maybe we'll do the Waldorf method. And you just follow the method, right? And just put your kid through it. And look at all the literature on it. I mean, it's got some track records here. It's interesting stuff. It's very interesting stuff. So I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious about that stuff. Yeah, what? No wokeology? You're kidding. No gender studies? Yeah, there's no gender studies in there. Do they have a pronoun policy in the Waldorf school? I don't know. Homeschooling probably won't help the relationship situation very much. Yeah, maybe not. But maybe it would, right? Maybe you have a bunch of people who are smart, and you have, I think like what's cool about the homeschool stuff is that they link up, right? So it's not like your kid just in isolation. Like it's a neighborhood. So the neighborhood will actually assemble the kids together. And I was talking to my business partner about this during COVID. I was telling him because he has kids, and when I didn't, I was like, man, you guys should start a pod in your neighborhood. I'm like, why isn't there like neighborhood pods? Like, you know, you're a lawyer. You could teach a lesson on history. You could be the history teacher. All right. So you're in charge of history for 1 hour a day, 1 day a week. And you get the whole neighborhood doing that, right? And everybody comes in and they all just volunteer or something. I'm like, why can't we facilitate that with technology and groups and stuff? And then turns out a bunch of people did that. Like a bunch of people did that during COVID. They actually sprung up these pods and they created these relationships. So it is interesting. I look back on a lot of my education, which was public schools and then private school and high school. And I'm very grateful for my education. I'm so grateful that I have it because it's basically everything. But it was a lot of waste of time. A lot of waste.
Yeah. Of time. Yeah, he is. He doesn't practice much anymore.
NY says, let's be honest. With technology, we have nearly every subject matter online. There are many different intros to just about every discipline. We aren't talking about 20-year-old inaccurate textbooks that I had to return and lug to school every day. Totally. You remember that? I had that too. NY. I had to go spend like $1,500, bring like 2 backpacks to college, spend all this money, fill up my books. I go around, walk around the book. Do they still do that? And then I have to find them. Oh, this one's garbage. This one's good. This one's yeah, I went to Brophy. This one is too marked up, all the things. And now it's just like on Wikipedia and all this stuff.
Okay.
We didn't have a lot of that. I went to church with plenty of homeschool kids. They weren't dating. I don't know what you mean by that, Cartier. That's a funny comment. They weren't dating. I don't know what that means. Were they not dating, but they were just doing the hibbity dibbity? Is that what you're talking about?
He was more in the.
Or they weren't doing the hibbity dibbity because they couldn't even communicate with each other because they were weird homeschool kids or something. I don't know. I don't know.
He talks about Phoenix all the time.
NY says, let's be honest with technology. We'd have nearly every subject matter online. Yeah. Says, life is a struggle. We have a societal behavioral problem. Life is a struggle. Kids these days don't have to go to school and plow the fields as in the past. That's right. You're right about that. I mean, I had that experience. Like I went to school and I had a job. But if these kids can't read and write or get jobs, and maybe there are no jobs for them, it's like we're going to have this entire group of people that really can't contribute much to society. That's a big problem.
Hello. Morning.
See, the Veil says, when rent is affordable to live in a place, then costs for
education
become more bearable.
Might have a couple.
I think that's probably true too.
Gather your IDs and just
if all of your money and resources are going to food because your food costs have doubled and your rent costs and your gas costs have doubled, it's a lot less disposable income to put towards your kids. Rubo say homeschooling student-teacher ratio is small. 24/7 says math is hard. It is hard. Yeah, I try to avoid it. Katania Mama says, I'm teaching my granddaughter the same. The younger, the better. Tiger Shark says, you're just pumping kids out into the world to work for other people instead of what actually makes them think, to think for themselves and to grow their own businesses. I think there's a lot of truth to that. You know, they don't teach you about things like leverage and about how you can compound your efforts. I think there's a lot of people who are just happy with people just showing up and putting hours in. K Bean says, yeah, lost social skills is also a thing. We also got locked down for 3 years, more or less. And the lockdown wasn't 3 years, but the psychological lockdown was. And there are consequences to all of that. Husky says, at the end of the 2023 school year, my then 10-year-old granddaughter was trying to be coerced into having intercourse. That's why my son was looking into homeschooling. Wild. 10 years old. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. Like the openness of like sexuality in the world, like what OnlyFans has done. And like what it's like this promiscuity thing. It's just like everywhere. Everything is like, okay, every relationship is disposable. Sex is meaningless. Yeah, nobody teaches you about quarterly taxes. You're right about that, Sweet Potato. Those sting, man. They don't teach you about businesses, LLCs, bookkeeping, being financially responsible. They just want you to get a credit card, get Netflix, watch the football games, and spend money. Pay your taxes like good little tax cattle. Okay, my friends. So I've got a meeting coming up. I'm going to jump into that. I want to tell you that we've got some good stuff queued up on the show today. So Hunter Biden is suing Giuliani. We've got that. I don't think it's a huge lawsuit, but Hunter is suing him, so we'll go look at it. We also had Donald Trump filed a very nice response back against Jack Smith on the January 6th case, talking about the gag order. And so we'll dig into that. And there will be more, whatever else is percolating. So we'll dive into all of that. NY says, I can understand homeschooling, but I think it will be hard for these individuals to function in a hierarchy.
Oh, are you the one that needed to be at this building?
So the Dems think the solution is a large amount of slave labor. Let's be honest. Dems love cheap labor. Yeah, I think they do want everybody
were
to
you
not
referred by
think, just kind
Carrie
of show up and do
over at
whatever they
Michigan
say,
Works?
get their paycheck,
Okay,
and
you're not
get
the
their, you know, get their money, vote Democrat, live their lives. That's it. Doesn't seem like a very fulfilling life to me, not to just work for the Democrats, but
digital.
For some people, it might be a good fit. But anyways, my friends, that is it for us. We'll leave it there. We'll see you back.
Okay. Morning.
Whether it's the 1.4
How you doing?
million
Yeah,
on Rumble or the
yes, sir. Have a seat at the great table over there.
On X, formerly Twitter.
Were you the one that was speaking to Carrie?
To Elon Musk.
Call over Michigan Works.
We've got a
Welcome to see me, or
show for you today. Thank you.
Today's my first day back from vacation, so I'm just trying to get caught up with things. Okay, you go to football game?
Thank you for the ongoing support, all of you. Incredibly and I recognize that it's very important that we continue to do our best to convey to you the truth as we understand it, to convey transparently to you the news and evolving world events in the best way we possibly can, inviting your cooperation, your collaboration. That's why it's important you post about this. That's why it's important, if you can, that you follow us and become a member of our Awakened Wonder community. There's a link there if you're not a member yet. If it's within your means, please join us. On the show today, we're going to talk about the news. There's a few interesting things. We've got Aaron Mate coming up to talk about the war, and we'll be talking about NATO expansion and Ukraine's destruction, and significantly how the mainstream media narrative doesn't cover explicit revelations from NATO directly that Putin warned them that if they continued their expansion, it would lead to war. This story, though, is astonishing in this peculiar, evolving global news space. Zelensky has visited Canada, of course, to get more funding for the ongoing war, where he has greeted and met and at least saluted an actual literal Nazi. I mean, the literal Nazi. You know, the word Nazi is used quite profligately these days in the extraordinary times that we live in. But when I say Nazi, in this instance, I mean, you remember Adolf Hitler and that army he had and that National Socialist movement that defined Germany and then the world in the late 30s and up to the mid 40s? You know, those Nazis, one of them.
A standing ovation for a Ukrainian veteran of the Second World War,
who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98.
Invited by House Speaker Anthony Rota to witness Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's address to Parliament, Yaroslav Hunka is one of his constituents.
He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero,
and a Nazi hero. This is extraordinary. I suppose you could ask yourself some pretty profound philosophical questions. For example, whether or not there were people within the Nazi movement that had God and light and love in their hearts. It's not an inquiry that we want to undertake, given the obvious impact of the Second World War, the Holocaust, the genocide, the murder, the terror, the horror. But when looking at the current reporting on the current conflict, it's extraordinary to see an actual Nazi hailed when we already know that within the Ukrainian fighting forces there are Nazis. And of course, this is not to diminish Ukrainian efforts. This is not to diminish the real need for humanitarian aid in Ukraine. This is in fact to suggest to you even though I know you know this because you are awakening and becoming enlightened along with us, that we have to look at the nuance and details in news reporting, that we have a news media that simplifies, reduces, amplifies, exaggerates, and sometimes out and out lies in order to curate a public space in where telling the truth becomes impossible and implausible, and dissent becomes an act that is absolutely verboten. That's a German word that would have been used by our friend there who's getting saluted by Zelensky. I mean, if we're going to celebrate actual Nazis, I remember one Nazi really stood above the crowd. Not literally, he was quite a short guy, but in terms of his contribution to Nazism, I mean, if we're honoring Nazis now, there's one guy that I really think you should investigate for a good old round of applause. Not my cup of tea, however, because I am against genocide and murder and expansionism and truly believe in unity, love, light, and peace and awakening. These are some of the things we'll be talking to Aaron Mate about a little later. I remember our last conversation. I asked Aaron, like, how do you feel about like the Second War, for example? You know, it's very
I see your picture.
Sort of inclined towards dissent, questioning legacy.
I started letting it go
de facto opposition
right after the lockdowns.
This simply because the mainstream are telling us.
Because I knew I wasn't going to be able to get it. Because I had a guy that trimmed it for me, even when I got my hair cut every 2 weeks.
Are opposed to it. How would you have been in the Second World War? And he's like, well, you know, my father.
And the wife liked it. She's like, don't
survivor, and that was a heroic conflict. I feel that times are escalating. The world is changing. We're actually losing our.
She's not happy that it's all gray.
Principles that we used to just assume were real principles. Judiciary. These are things that's just discarded now. What we live in is a technological totalitarianism where what we're moving towards.
My wife's not a cuddler, so.
Shut down your finances to prevent you from communicating, because if you can control dissent, if you can shut down dissent, then what is there to stop this great trajectory towards technocracy? A cadre of experts with absolute totalitarian power. And just to demonstrate to you that this is not just hyperbole and panic, New York City are introducing friendly, lovable, cuddly surveillance robots for your convenience and safety. Do you know, like when you're in Manhattan,
right.
Think,
it's like this is the group we're going to have, which is fine with me.
It is around every corner.
Like I said, first day back from a week's vacation.
Now it ain't. Now it's a surveillance.
Work doesn't go away; it just gets set aside when you're on vacation.
For now, spying on you. Who knows what they'll be doing in a couple of months or years.
Well, it seems like something out of a sci-fi movie. Robots appearing in the city's underground.
Fox 6's Richard G. Kovas shows us how the NYPD says this new tech will help with public safety.
Do you see how the news doesn't have any obligation towards objectivity? The news doesn't say, you're being told that this is for your safety, but we're going to scrutinize that before just telling you it, because in case this is a surveillance robot that will be used to further impede your already eroded freedom. No, they the conclusion that the state wants you to reach. Here is a lovely robot. Get used to it. When you see this robot, it's a friendly robot. Not like, I've got grave concerns about this robot on the subway and how it could be utilized, how, like so many things, it can metastasize into yet another tool for authoritarianism. It's not possible that could happen, is it? It's not possible that you might introduce measures like temporary passports or temporary 15-minute zones or temporary lockdowns or temporary medicines and then use that to create an authoritarian space where communication just becomes very, very difficult, where openness, where honesty, where transparency all fall by the wayside, where cherished principles are just discarded, and if you want to oppose this march, then you could have a robot knocking on your door in a pretty clumsy way from the look of them, because they look like an upturned wheelie bin to me.
To some strap hangers, it may look like something you'd find wandering around your local Stop and Shop.
It's really weird. What is it?
Weird, maybe, but this RoboCop, well, it's so much more than that.
We're taking existing technology, cameras, being able to communicate with people, and we're placing it on wheels.
This isn't anything to worry about. We're already spying on you. We're all ready to communicate. This is just tyranny, but on wheels now. And during the Christmas season, it's tyranny on ice.
Behold the NYPD's newest Crime Stopper, K5 Autonomous, a security robot that will soon patrol the Times Square 42nd Street subway station.
Think of your grandparents. Think of your ancestors, your forefathers and foremothers, and the values they instilled in you. trust, community, love, kindness, compassion, unity, open-heartedness, a willingness to listen. Now look at this news item. Actual robots pedaled out onto the street. They'll tell you it's progress. They'll tell you it's convenience. They'll tell you that it's safety. Unless you're in a state of perpetual fear, you won't tolerate stuff like that, will you? You'll say, no, you're all right. We'll govern our own spaces. We'll govern our own community. We'll have our own communication, thanks. We don't need a media that primarily seems to function as a tool of the state and the powerful, never questioning state authority, never questioning corporate authority, always willing to peddle their lies, always.
We will continue to stay ahead of those who want to harm everyday New Yorkers.
Who is that now? Who is it? Like, it used to be terrorists. Sometimes it's the Russians, germs. Really, do you know what it is? It becomes actually principles like freedom and liberty. The very words that are used to rally us into compliance are the principles that they most loathe. Your inner space, your attention, your ability to decide for yourself.
This building is 180 years old.
Trade, communicate,
we're not that old.
All these things are being challenged.
Vectrum food
being inventory turned into data
became quality foods, or quality foods became Vectrum.
Data is becoming militarized. Information is becoming controlled.
About
The ability
13
to
years.
openly communicate, education, every single aspect of your life is becoming immersed in a
course, it
chrome
was-
sphere.
The front building here, this building here is 180
But
years
it's on wheels.
as it goes back farther and farther, it gets
Adams
more. Now, this is just the
unveiled
mix.
today underground.
Most of the work
Part
is done
this
over
new
on
push to
Telegraph, a much
increase law
newer
enforcement
facility.
technology in the
It's
country's
packaged
largest
facility,
transit
so-
system. The rollout
And that's-
comes
that's
despite
where they do
crime in the
both
city
shifts, first and
subways,
second shift.
down 4.5% compared to last year, according to police.
We've got it down 4.5% without surveillance robots on wheels. Just imagine how lovely a subway ride is going to be where we can steal all your data.
We are taking an
Doesn't like
expansive
that's
camera
what-
network in the subway system and adding to it.
The 400-pound, 5'3" K5 is not.
We've already got an expansive camera network. How about more of that?
swap,
You've only
yeah.
got one decision to make for yourself. Do you trust the state? Do you trust the state's relationship with corporations? Do you trust the judiciary? Who do you trust? And why trust?
Okay,
Why
now,
not verify?
computer, the internet.
Don't trust, verify. How about autonomy within your
So
own
when you
community?
click
How
use-
about democracy? How about they don't get to introduce stuff like that without maybe you vote for it? How about that? How about do you want surveillance robots on the
And now I'm viewing from over here,
We're
so if
living
you have
in
any
such a
questions,
state of
let me
panic
know. I
and
can click
anxiety,
over next
like
to it.
heightened flight, fight, freeze states that it's difficult to remain rational and say, what is our vision for America? What is our vision for the United Kingdom? Our vision for our community? What do you see for your children, and for your grandchildren, and for the planet itself, and for your community, and the spaces that you love? Can you even think about that anymore with the energy crisis, with the food crisis, with the ongoing wars, with the constant threat of pandemics? No, it's very difficult to think straight, isn't it? But don't worry, because there's dystopia on wheels rolling up right next to you as you ride the subway to photograph your face and make sure you're not doing a non-compliant expression.
I'm sorry?
You sit in dumb misery.
Oh, today is the 26th, 9/26.
Nothing short of being high tech. It's equipped with 4
Of course, I don't know until I look at the
cameras that
bottom of
allow
my
it to send
computer
back
screen,
live
so.
video to the police department. But some subway riders say they're a bit concerned about their invasion of privacy. Others appreciate another set of eyes, even if it's in robot form.
They're sort of presenting it as if it's amusing and humorous. It's this kind of nullifying of the understandable anxiety you feel as you note that the state is stepping up power, the militarization of the police force, the technologization of the police force,
Yep.
the full.
I know it says OH because we're part of the Ohio region.
On the revelations of Edward Snowden yet. No one's ever sort of gone, hey, we're going to stop.
Yeah, all
doing
this is
that
supposed to
stuff.
be upgraded
The
next
Patriot
month
Act
sometime.
That was only for
We'll
a
see.
temporary period, just rolls on and on and on. You have to ask yourself, do I trust this system?
Impact employment, I'm
Is
sticking
this
up to help
system
you.
in my service, or am I in the service of this system? Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments. Remember, only the first 15 minutes will be ubiquitously available. Then we will be on Rumble. If it's within your means, join our community. When we get a little bit back more to normal, God willing, you will be able to comment while we're going along. Plus, you get additional content. There's all sorts of advantages, and it's the only way that you can support us continually at a time where your support becomes absolutely essential.
Well, I like that there are, even though they're not human eyes, that there are eyes that are following what's going on the platform.
I think that, yeah, it's an invasion of privacy because if us, us the public, we don't agree to it, it shouldn't be put.
You can begin seeing K5 Autonomous as early as tonight.
So the news is just doing the bidding of the say. Why don't you come out of your home for a brief moment? You're allowed out this week. Come out for a moment, see if you can spot a robot. But be careful it doesn't spot you, because it may not like you. If you've got nothing to hide, you got nothing to worry about. But you never know. Next week, you may have something to hide because the rules might just change. We haven't even got time to talk about U.S. Senator Bob Menendez and his wife being charged with bribery in the most sort of old-fashioned, mad gangster fashion with gold bullion bars and briefcases full of money and stuff out of a bad 80s daytime film called Corrupto Cops or something. We haven't got time to bring you that. If you're watching us on YouTube or anywhere else, we love you. We appreciate you. We need you. Click the link in the description and join us for our conversation with Aaron Matte. Join us for our analysis of NATO's revelation that they knew they were provoking Putin to a state of war, and they continue to do it anyway. Why are the mainstream media not reporting on this? We need you with us now more than ever, you awakening wonders. So click the link in the description, and if it's within your means, join our movement. Support us. Become part of this movement. We need you now more than ever. If you're watching us on Rumble, give us a like. Remember, subscribe. We need to see those subscribers shooting right up, and press that red button. Become an awakened wonder. Now, we've been telling you for a while because we've been listening to experts, because we've been trying to pull together information from a wide variety of sources, including Aaron Matte, actually, who will be joining us later, but also Jeffrey Sachs, who's been on the show, that NATO knew they were provoking Putin into a state of war, and yet they did it anyway. Why are the mainstream media not reporting on that? Why can't we get transparency and clarity? Let's have a look. Here's the news. No, here's the effing news.
Thank you for choosing Fox News.
No, here's the fucking news.
Wait, NATO just admitted that they were warned that continued expansion would lead to Ukrainian invasion. They did it anyway. So who really caused this war? And why are the media not covering this?
Yes, Anna.
Today, we are talking about the extraordinary revelation that NATO have acknowledged that they were warned by Putin's administration that continuing to expand NATO would lead to an invasion of the Ukraine, and yet they did it anyway. This is not simply to say, oh, aren't NATO bad and isn't Russia fantastic? Of course, this is a geopolitical issue. It's not that simple. What we're interested in is why the mainstream media not covering the fact that NATO have acknowledged that they knew that their actions and expansion would lead to this war. Why are we continually told this was an egregious, unprovoked attack? What is the truth behind this war? And why is it that when someone publicly says the quiet part out loud, the legacy media still doesn't cover it? Whose agenda are they pursuing? Is it ours, or do they have a different intention? Let's have a look at this story together. Use our innate wisdom to deduce the truth as one.
President Putin declared in the autumn of 2021, and he actually sent a draft treaty that he wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was what he sent us.
So it seems that had they been willing to sign a treaty to not expand NATO, this war could have been avoided. What is the advantage of expanding NATO? That's one question. Secondly, of course, many of you are aware that at the climax or indeed conclusion of the Cold War, pledges were made to not expand NATO into former Soviet territories. We all know this now, don't we? It's not something that's broadly covered because, again, it's not favorable to the preferred narrative. And most importantly, as far as I'm concerned, is why are the legacy media, when reporting on the subject of this ongoing war, this drain and strain on human resources and indeed human life, this decimation of Ukraine, 500,000 people dead so far, why are they not saying, well, of course, NATO have now acknowledged that they were warned that if they continue to expand, then Putin would invade, and they did it anyway. So who caused this war? What is the reason this war is happening? And significantly, how could we end this war?
And that was a precondition for not invade Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that.
Okay, so
the opposite happened. He wanted us to sign a promise never to enlarge NATO. He wanted us to remove our military infrastructure in all allies that have joined NATO since 1997, meaning half of NATO, all the Central and Eastern Europe. We should remove NATO from that part of our alliance.
In a sense, when you listen to this speech, it becomes clear that this war has been a long time coming, probably with the membership of each of these former Soviet nations, in the case that they were former members of the Soviet Union. It has encroached further on the agreement not to expand NATO. So it's not like a war that began all of a sudden. It's part of the ebb and flow of history, and perhaps you will agree with people like Jeffrey Sachs that this war has come about to a degree as a result of the unipolar agenda of centralist American interests, because they have an agenda to deplete Russia, because they have an agenda to create a unipolar world where Chinese interests and Russian interests are challenged. They were willing to agitate Russia to the point of war. And the reason I mention that is because, of course, we're continually told this is a humanitarian crisis. Remember what you're supposed to believe. This is what you're supposed to believe. Russia, basically for no reason, started to wage war on Ukraine. It's terrible. It's Putin is the new Hitler. And again, this is not to advocate for Putin. It's not to advocate for the actions of Russia. This is simply to say, if the intention, the aim, the goal was to end war, these are probably have to take into account.
So he went to war to prevent NATO versus borders. He has got the exact opposite. He has got more NATO presence in the eastern part of the alliance.
We're not a pro-Russia channel. This organisation is not pro-Russia. I'm sure that we'll be doing this in Russia.
This isn't
we would
YouTube.
Experience a lot more censorship.
Oh, Rumble. Okay, yeah.
Hey, who's to say? But what we are saying is that everything this man is inventorying here seem like unwise moves from a diplomatic perspective if the intention was to have a harmonious relationship with Russia, to acknowledge that Russia have their own sovereignty, have their own nation, have their own history, have their own trajectory. This seems like, well, hold on a minute, aren't you like provoking a nuclear superpower for reasons, again, that don't seem that clear? Because there's not at any point going, of course, we have to have all these countries as members of NATO in order what? What happens? Is it going to help global warming?
And he has also seen that Finland has already joined the alliance, and Sweden will soon be a full member.
Also, we have plans to put cellophane over Vladimir Putin's toilet so when he go pee-pee, it splashes all over him. I got one of these puzzles. Stop provoking Vladimir Putin. Some of us don't want the world to be destroyed.
This is good for the Nordic countries, it's good for Finland and Sweden, and it's also good for NATO, and it demonstrates that when President Putin invaded a European country to prevent more NATO, he's getting the exact opposite.
Right. And now we've got a massive war in which 500 million people have been...
No, I do that. You just do the sign part versus
understand this with a little more detail. How do we get into this war and how do we get out of it? During the disastrous Vietnam War, it was said that the US government treated the public like a mushroom farm, keeping it in the dark and feeding it with manure. The heroic Daniel Ellsberg leaked the Pentagon Papers documenting the unrelenting US government lying about the war in order to protect politicians who would be embarrassed by the truth. A half-century later, during the Ukraine war, the manure is piled even higher. According to the US government and the ever-obsequious New York Times, the Ukraine war was unprovoked, the Times' favourite adjective to describe the war. That is continually what you were told. If you only watched the mainstream media, if you only read the New York Times and someone said to you, what's this war about? Well, it was an unprovoked attack. People don't do unprovoked attacks. People do provoked attacks. That's what this is. This was provoked. In fact, we've just heard NATO. This is not Russian propaganda. This is NATO saying, well, Putin said that if we kept expanding NATO, there would be a war. And so we just kept expanding NATO, which seems to me to be an extraordinary decision for an unelected body funded somewhat by your nation and my nation to have made on my behalf. I don't remember being asked whether I wanted to provoke Russia into a war. Do you remember being asked? Whose agenda is being fulfilled? Why is it not being responsibly reported on? What kind of cultural curation is taking place? That certain ideas are just not allowed to be in the space of public communication. Why is it that the media continue to be so obedient to an agenda that plainly is bringing us to the edge of an extremely dangerous situation? Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments. If you're watching us on YouTube, you 6.6 million Awakening Wonders. We're only putting half the video up here for reasons that are surely obvious to to you, the majority of the content will be up on Rumble. If you're watching us on Twitter or X, Elon, thank you, we appreciate you, but we will be doing the rest of the content on Rumble because that is our home and that's where we're looked after. Putin, allegedly mistaken himself for Peter the Great, invaded Ukraine to recreate the Russian Empire. Yet last week, NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg committed a Washington gaffe, meaning that he accidentally blurted out the truth. This is what a gaffe means these days, an inability to sustain the deceptive narrative that controls the public sphere, that controls the augmented reality that we're invited to live in. This is why independent media is under threat, because we can say, hey, look at this thing, NATO said that. Does that help you to draw a different conclusion? Hey, have you listened to Jeffrey Sachs? He's not a whack job. He's a university professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. They have a different perspective. That's why these things are challenging. That's why it's important to stay with us. In testimony to the European Union Parliament, Stoltenberg made clear that it was America's relentless push to enlarge NATO to Ukraine that was the real cause of the war and why it continues today. Here are Stoltenberg's revealing words. Again, the background was that President Putin declared in the autumn of 2021 and actually sent a draft treaty that they wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That's what he sent us and was a precondition to not invade Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that. Well done you. Now, Ukraine is being devastated. 500,000 people are dead and the situation shows no sign of improving, and actually no one at all benefits from it except for the military-industrial complex and centralist authoritarian systems that want us to be in a perpetual state of fear and unable to question authority in our own life because we're terrified of continual pandemics and what. No, some people do benefit. Thanks for this. The opposite happened. He wanted us to sign that promise, never to enlarge NATO. He wanted us to remove our military infrastructure in all allies that have joined NATO since 1997, meaning half of NATO. All the Central and Eastern Europe, we should remove NATO from that part of our alliance, introducing some kind of B or second-class membership. We rejected that. Can you see why a figure like Donald Trump, who says, we'd withdraw from NATO or we'd stop funding NATO, is a kind of wrecking ball?
No, first shift.
NATO members must finally contribute. Over the last 8 years, the United States,
I mean, it could be any site that we place yet.
than all other NATO countries combined.
Because this is the kind of thing that can continue unquestioned. Like, when in your life do you have time to go, hey, I'm not sure if we should be supporting NATO anymore? You're being overcharged for your energy, you're being overcharged for your food, you're working too hard, you're living in a nihilistic culture that has no vision for improvement, you're living amongst fracture, fissure, thrashed around by bad ideas and bad lies most of the time. When are you ever going to be able to say, hey, is there an alternative way of living? Do we need NATO? Are the WHO actually helpful? How are they funded? Where's all this information coming from? Is there the ability to post counter narratives? You've not got time for that, have you? Well, we're going to have to make time, because it seems to me that we're on the precipice of some pretty significant changes. But what we're moving to is a technological dictatorship where there is the ability to shut down your money, shut down your life, unperson you if you even dare to question the trajectory of global or national events. Or if you want to have a conversation, if you want to have cultural differences, you are going to be able to be eliminated. This seems to me to be the terrain that they're trying to create. And organizations like NATO, WHO, I'm not saying they're entirely malign or malevolent or were created even for the wrong reasons. I'm saying that now the way they're operating is certainly beyond the remit of democracy, and you're funding for it and you're not voting for it. That's the opposite of democracy. So he went to war to prevent NATO. More NATO close to his borders. He has got the exact opposite. I mean, stop provoking Vladimir Putin in the middle of a war. Do you remember when Tucker said that within a year we'll have a hot war with Russia? Does that seem more or less likely? Let me know in the chat right now. To repeat, he, Putin, went to war to prevent NATO, more NATO close to his borders. When Professor John Mearsheimer and I, and others have said the same, we've been attacked as Putin apologists. So at this point, this is sort of, I suppose, where we get into a degree of complexity. In this video, we're not saying to you, Russia are really great and NATO are bad, even though I can feel myself getting agitated on behalf of sort of the concept of Russia by the bureaucratic disingenuity of this unelected administrative official. But actually what Sachs is saying, and what he's saying his colleague Mearsheimer are saying, is we told you this and we were dismissed as conspiracy theorists. Now think about the last couple of years. How many times have things been said that are true that you're dismissed as a conspiracy theorist for believing? Think of all of the major world events, the pandemic. I mean, the litany, it just goes on and on. What is happening in conjunction with very significant geopolitical moves in order, I believe, to create a unipolar globalist world where democracy and sovereignty and community are completely eroded is the inability even to challenge on any individual issue. Dissenting voices shut down, alternative voices annihilated. The same critics also choose to hide or flatly ignore the dire warnings against NATO enlargement to Ukraine, long articulated by many of America's leading diplomats, including the great scholar-statesman George Kennan and the former US ambassadors to Russia, Jack Matlock and William Burns. So it's not all crackpots and whack jobs and people on the internet that are hippies with an axe to grind that believe in community and autonomy and democracy and that love is the answer and you have to find God within yourself, find God now. It's like actual like diplomats and people that broadly speaking are in the general ebb and flow of international geopolitical discourse. So it's like Willie Nelson and Janis Joplin and
monetary systems
have decided that we're being lied to. It's like
they'll ask directly about like a
William Burns and George Kennan, dudes in suits in oak panelled rooms. This is a really dangerous and unprecedented time. Let me know if you agree. Burns, now CIA director, was US ambassador to Russia in 2008 and author of a memo entitled
But yeah, it is about the
in that memo, Burns
that's like direct cash.
Condoleezza Rice, that the entire Russian political class, not just Putin, was dead set against NATO enlargement. We know about the memo only because it was leaked, otherwise we'd be in the dark about it. How many other things we simply never have revealed to us? How much is clandestine? What do you imagine is behind those walls and doors of secrecy that they claim are there to protect us from terrorists? It's just more information that you go, oh man, we can't trust these lot. Start dismantling NATO, get rid of that, just completely radically reevaluate all of our democratic systems to first and foremost disable these gargantuan monoliths of horror that are guiding us gently to Armageddon. Let's get rid of them straight away. That's what you would understand if you were to have access to those classified documents, isn't it? Oh no, these classified documents. It was a surprise birthday party and you spoiled it. Remember them days, guys? Why does Russia oppose NATO enlargement? Yeah, why is that? For the simple reason that Russia does not accept the US military on its 2,300-kilometer border with Ukraine.
Yeah, basically we get a tax credit if we hire somebody off of
placement of Aegis missiles
like
in
up until
Poland
now,
and Romania
so
after the US unilaterally abandoned the anti-ballistic missile treaty. Oh, he's abandoned that. How about a treaty? No missiles. How about fuck your treaty? Russia also does not welcome the fact that the US engaged in no fewer than 70 regime change operations during the Cold War, 1947 and 1989. That regime change was a surprise for your birthday. They've got a country and an institution in the shape of NATO on their borders, armed, who they know have engaged in regime change 70 times since the last war. They know that they are explicitly their enemy, and they're saying, do you mind not doing that? I mean, it essentially amounts to a polite request, eventually followed by war. Now, there's a deep and troubling history between Russia and Ukraine that I'm plainly not an expert in. What this is about is, why don't the media simply report accurately on this subject? So I can answer my own rhetorical question, because if they did, you'd make up your own mind. And when you make up your own mind, you will be less compliant and less obedient, and they cannot have that. And countless more since, including in Serbia, Afghanistan, Georgia, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Venezuela, and Ukraine. Yeah, but we're not going to do any more. Nor does Russia like the fact that many leading US politicians actively advocate the destruction of Russia under the banner of decolonizing Russia. That would be like Russia calling for the removal of Texas, California, Hawaii, and conquered Indian lands, and much else from the United States. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine that Hawaii.
You can already want, or you can not answer it. Up to you.
What? The United States haven't been
These questions, I think, are pretty much obsolete anymore. They're going to, I think, eventually they're going to go away from
advisory payments while they send incredible sums elsewhere, apparently to support a war that it seems like they, to some considerable degree,
it keeps groups off of our back. If we say, yeah, we hire so many minorities.
Took their oil. What's the benefit?
I mean, the majority of our employees are minorities.
Start asking yourself that question. Love America. Love your history. Love your nation. Love your traditions. Love your forefathers and your foremothers. But who benefits from there being one centralized government that
it shouldn't, but right now the law says we have to ask that.
Complex, Big Pharma uses the legacy media to whitewash and bleach the cultural space free of independent thought and independent conversation. Are you benefiting? Is it helping your energy bills? Is it helping your food bills? Is it helping your freedom? Is it helping your children's education? Is it helping your family's health? You let me know in the comments. Even Zelensky's team knew that the quest for NATO enlargement meant imminent war with Russia. Alexei Arestovich, former advisor to the office of President of Ukraine under Zelensky, declared that with a 99.9% probability, our price for joining NATO is a big war with Russia. I think we can say it's 100% now. That remaining percentile. Arestovich claimed that even without NATO enlargement, Russia would eventually try to take Ukraine just many years later. Yet history belies that. Russia respected Finland and Austria's neutrality for decades with no dire threats, much less invasions. Moreover, from Ukraine's independence in 1991 until the US-backed overthrow of Ukraine's elected government in 2014, Russia didn't show any interest in taking Ukrainian territory. It was only when the US installed a staunchly anti-Russian pro-NATO regime in February 2014, coup, US-inspired, let me know in the comments, that Russia took back Crimea, concerned that its Black Sea naval base in Crimea since 1783 would fall into NATO's hands. Even then, Russia didn't demand other territory from Ukraine, only fulfillment of the UN-backed Minsk II agreement, which called for autonomy of the ethnic Russian Donbass, not a Russian claim on the territory. Yet, instead of diplomacy, the US armed, trained, and helped to organize a huge Ukrainian army to make NATO enlargement a fait accompli. I mean, that does seem pretty significant. Okay, option one, diplomacy. Yeah, but what about option two? We arm, train, and organize a huge Ukrainian army. Do you want a war? Putin made one last attempt at diplomacy at the end of 2021, tabling a draft US-NATO security agreement to forestall war. The core of the draft agreement was an end of NATO enlargement and removal of US missiles near Russia.
I don't even try.
Concerns were
I mean,
valid in the basis for
your
negotiations.
flashes are
Yet
just in the wrong
Biden
direction.
flatly rejected negotiations out of a combination of arrogance, hawkishness, and profound miscalculation. Can you just talk me through your reasoning here? Yes, I can. Firstly, arrogance. Good. Secondly, hawkishness. Oh, very good. And thirdly, what's that word? I miscalculate a lot. Oh, this is going to go well. NATO maintained its position that NATO would not negotiate with Russia regarding NATO enlargement. In effect, NATO enlargement was none of Russia's business, but it's actually only Russia's business. That's actually all it is. That's all that NATO actually does, isn't it? Annoys Russia.
Click exit, yep, and then I'm going to load some forms and you're going to log right back in the
work out an acronym, but it seems that primarily what they ideologically stand for is provoking Russia into wars. Well, what else are they doing? The continuing US obsession with NATO enlargement is profoundly irresponsible and hypocritical. The US would object by means of war if needed to being encircled by Russian or Chinese military bases in the Western Hemisphere, a point the US has made since the Monroe Doctrine of 1823. Yet, the US is blind and deaf to the legitimate security concerns of other countries. It's extraordinary. They can't be actually blind and deaf, yet sure play a mean pinball. They just don't care, do they? Because it's at odds with an explicit, plain agenda. An agenda that sometimes becomes explicit due to saying the quiet part out loud moments like we saw Stoltenberg there in NATO. But generally speaking, we're told that American foreign interest is to sort of guide the world towards democracy, inadvertently gathering resources and depleting potential opposition. And remember, when I talk about America, I'm not talking about American people, the decent, beautiful American people and the history of America and the great stands they've made against genuine tyranny and fascism. I'm talking about this new corporatized America that plainly operates on behalf of the military-industrial complex and corporate interests elsewhere and directly against the interests of their own people and the world. So yes, Putin went to war to prevent NATO, more NATO close to Russia's border. Ukraine is being destroyed by US arrogance, proving again Henry Kissinger's adage that to be America's enemy is dangerous, while to be its friend is fatal. The Ukraine war will end when the US acknowledges a simple truth. NATO enlargement to Ukraine means perpetual war and Ukraine's destruction. Ukraine's neutrality could have avoided the war and remains the key to peace. The deeper truth is that European security depends on collective security as called for by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, not one-sided NATO demands. So there you are. You have seen with your own eyes and heard with your own ears a NATO representative telling you that they knew that their actions explicitly continuing expansion would lead to war. They've been told that. You have heard from Jeffrey Sachs that there have been opportunities for diplomatic resolution along the way. Many of you are familiar with Boris Johnson.
So now you can click on where it says employee login and then log back in using the user ID and password you created.
An intended peace treaty. So when you have those facts at your disposal, I beg of you, ask yourself this question. Whose agenda is being served here? Why are the media not reporting more accurately on this conflict? Who is able to control both the media space and the geopolitical stage to a degree where it is apparently against the interests of Russian people, Ukrainian people, American people, English people, all of the citizenry of the world potentially affected by an escalating conflict that has no resolution? It has no resolution. There's not a point where Russia goes, oh, well, go on then, expand NATO, unless they're absolutely annihilated and destroyed. And world history shows you what that's likely to mean. It means world war, global cataclysm. And for me, we should have the opportunity to electively and electorally determine if that is what we want to participate in, because I don't. I believe in a peaceful solution as quickly as possible, and I believe in a transparent media that will investigate and use their resources to explore and understand what's happening in this war, rather than amplifying the messages of the elites that benefit from situations that to the rest of us are crises. Whether that's a war, an energy crisis, or a health crisis, it seems that they somehow benefit. What are we going to do to oppose them? It seems to me we have to remain connected to one another and be willing to rise up in great disobedience together. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the chat. See you in a second.
Thank you for choosing Fox News.
No, here's the fucking news.
Who better to give us a more nuanced perspective on that complex story and why it's not being directly reported than Aaron Maté, the investigative journalist for The Grey Zone, co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast. I consider this to be an incredible honor. He's wanted on an FBI blacklist.
Okay.
He's the most
So
prolific.
this is their employee portal, basically. This, like I said, after today, you'll use this to.
Sir, you're in good company. Welcome to the show, Aaron.
I'll give you a paper with the actual website. Not that long.
Aaron, what do you think about their recent admission by NATO?
Click on where it says e-documents.
In particular, that they knew that continued escalation.
Click the green button there. It says employee start wizard.
Territory would lead to war, and did it anyway.
It's a pretty amazing admission, but it shows that people who've been pointing out from the start that this proxy war was not entirely, but a large part due to NATO expansion, were correct. And when we pointed this out, we were called Putin apologists, Russian propagandists. Now you have the head of NATO admitting
so you can see the whole thing.
Russia went.
Basically, most of them are rules and tax forms and stuff.
And you were allowed to
Check
discuss
the box
this
on the
before
top and
Russia
bottom to
invaded.
sign it.
So
I will
for
be
many
giving you a
years,
written
there was
copy of these as
people
well.
in the heart of the U.S. establishment, people like Bill Burns, who is Biden's current director of the CIA. Back when he was the U.S. ambassador to Russia in 2008, he wrote a famous cable that we know of thanks to
Thanks for going through all your names.
warning that NATO expansion to Ukraine was a red line for all of Russia, not just for Putin's faction, but all of Russia, because they recognized that if ever a civil war broke out in Ukraine, that would force Russia to take a side on behalf of the Russia-aligned citizens of Ukraine, which is in the millions.
Splotchy.
And that would force
I think it's. I've been trying to get them to make it. Whenever I have a choice on websites, I use the dark version.
Maidan coup.
White, for
And
some
Russia,
reason, bugs
just
the
as
hell out
the
of my
US would not
UV
accept
light.
Mexico or Canada having offensive weaponry pointed at the U.S. and being part of a hostile military alliance. Russia also could not accept having Ukraine, which is historically tied to Russia, being a part of NATO. And here you have Jens Stoltenberg, the chief of NATO, admitting that, albeit way too late.
It's another example of a story, or at least a component of a story, that was initially regarded as a conspiracy theory that has been derided. It's probably one of the reasons that you've been so maligned, is reporting in the relatively objective way that you have on this particular conflict that has over time become verified. Why do you think, in spite of this ongoing process of verification of information that's regarded as periphery or unreliable, that we are still able to sustain a sort of central narrative that induces a kind of compliance and lack of inquiry, even though we continually recognize that information that's apparently conspiratorial or from the periphery, and certainly is dissenting, is increasingly being proven to be correct?
It's a good question, and it's especially salient in light of the experience of the Iraq War. The media was caught red-handed, parroting the Bush administration's lies that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and was working with Al-Qaeda. Everybody knows now that that was a lie.
It's much more modern.
No lessons have seemingly been learned, because in war after war, the U.S. constantly does the bidding of the establishment and repeats the same narratives that are used to justify going to war and justifying sanctions, even when there's no evidence for them, or even when the evidence shows them to be lies. So, for example, in Libya, we were told that we had to go in and bomb Libya because Gaddafi was going to commit a genocide. That's been exposed as a lie. In Syria, we were told we had to bomb Syria because the government used chemical weapons. All investigations into this have shown actually that the evidence is not there, including the OPCW's own leaks, which show that to be a lie. In Ukraine as well, again, Jens Stoltenberg admitting that this was actually not about Russia trying to erase Ukraine from the map, but Russia trying to stop NATO. So you have all these examples where you have facts undermining the pro-war narrative, but Western media still goes along and does its job. And I guess the problem there is that people in positions of power in the media don't see their jobs as actually doing their jobs of following the facts. They see themselves as representatives and stenographers of people in power. They hang out with people in power. They want to become the people in power. There's a huge, revolving door between people who work in media, people who work in government. If you look at CNN and MSNBC, there's so many people who are former top U.S. intelligence officials. The former White House spokesperson, Jen Psaki, hosts a show on MSNBC. Same with Fox News. You have former Republican stenographers now hosting shows. And that's a real problem. So when you have a media that identifies more with power than it does with following the facts, you're going to have lies being repeated over and over and over.
Even in this climate, with the type of reporting that you describe, a recent CNN poll suggests that 55% of Americans don't want further funding of this conflict, but want a peaceful resolution. Given that the United States appears to be in a place of near financial catastrophe, certainly in considerable debt, and there's a lot of opposition to expenditure of this nature, by which I mean military expenditure overseas, as opposed to, for example, the kind of welfare spending that would seem sensible in response to the Hawaiian fire, for example. It's often left, at least in the political sphere, to figures like Rand Paul to present a counter narrative and to challenge the ongoing funding. I feel like there's another $24 billion that's meant to go to ongoing military expenditure. And of course, Zelensky's in Canada, literally sort of saluting, I feel like an actual Nazi at some point over recent days. If there is increasing opposition, can this carry on indefinitely? Or is there simply never going to be a legitimate opportunity to oppose it democratically?
Well, the problem is the U.S. is dug in so deep. And before Russia's invasion, they undermined any reasonable opportunity to prevent it. So Jens Stoltenberg admitted that Russia went to war in part to prevent NATO expansion. There also was the fact that the Ukrainian government, largely under pressure from extremist far-right nationalists inside Ukraine, did not want to implement the Minsk Accords, which was the 2015 peace deal intended to end the civil war that began the year before after a U.S.-backed coup. And at every turn, the U.S. and its allies inside Ukraine's far right undermined any opportunities for
peace. The box above it.
Now they're not going to go back on that now. So what they're looking at is basically perpetual frozen
conflict.
conflict.
Ask you to verify that if you check it.
Public opinion in the U.S. could make a difference. And you mentioned that poll showing that recently, for the first time, the majority of Americans oppose more funding
up here.
Proxy war. But at least don't care about
other names and apartment number. If you don't have one, you put N/A.
Really force them into making a change, and we don't see that yet because the anti-war movement in the U.S., as it has around the NATO world, has been so undermined. But that poll showing majority opposition is pretty amazing because even though most Americans have been denied the basic facts of this war, they still now oppose it. So, for example, imagine how many more people would oppose funding for this proxy war if they knew that after Russia invaded, there was a peace deal reached in early 2022 between Ukraine and Russia, but the West blocked it. Boris Johnson famously came over to Kiev and told Zelensky that if you make a deal with Putin, we're not going to back you up because right now is the time to fight him, and we feel that we can hand him a crushing defeat inside Ukraine. And that was an order to Zelensky, who was a client of the US and the UK, to keep fighting. No establishment media outlet in the US has reported about on this peace deal, except for one journal, Foreign Affairs, which is read by people who go to fancy fundraisers in Manhattan and Washington, but otherwise it's not read. So most people do not know about this peace deal, and certainly no one knows that this peace deal was blocked by the West. So imagine how much higher opposition would be if people knew of basic facts like that.
The way that reality can be controlled and curated, the way that a kind of public sphere of ideas can be so carefully and cleverly managed, certain ideas and agenda amplified, other information, like the example you just given of the potential for a peace deal almost a year ago, or the beginning, over a year ago, like can be sort of extracted and ignored and just sort of lost in the wind of history and in the deluge of blizzard of constant ongoing information. Do you feel that the necessity for independent media is becoming more pronounced and more obvious? What did you learn personally when you're placed or almost placed, or there was an attempt to put you on an FBI blacklist, when you're attacked in the way that you are personally, called a spreader of disinformation? And how do you connect that to sort of perhaps more nefarious forms of censorship, like Grey Zone's GoFundMe being curiously shut down, some of their funding, I think, being directed to other causes? So on a personal level, how do you feel about censorship and the management of the space, not just around the war, but generally? And what do you think about the sort of evident escalation of techniques to control and shut down independent media?
Well, look, it's a major problem that we have something called the media, but inside that space, you have people with radically different approaches to the job of being a journalist. I see journalism fundamentally as being loyal to the facts, no matter where they lead, and certainly not serving any powerful center, whether it's the US, whether it's Russia, or any corporation, but serving the people and serving facts. And the problem is so many people inside the Western media establishment, which I'm in, I think,
no, it's animal feed container,
and have internalized their own biases and their own agendas of basically wanting to spread US hegemony, and so don't want to do anything that undermines that. And they're also kept in line by sort of the schoolyard mentality, where all you have to do is be called a name, like a Putin apologist or a Russian propagandist. And that the fear of that is enough to keep people into being obedient and end up being stenographers for their own power centers. So basically doing exactly what we accuse Russia of doing. And I don't follow that. And because I don't follow that, the Grey Zone doesn't follow that. We often get called a whole bunch of names. And there are attempts to deplatform us. In my case, I reported on this, and we've talked about this before on your show, as you mentioned. The FBI sent Twitter a list of social media accounts, and it asked Twitter to remove these accounts and also hand over their information. And the FBI wasn't doing this at its own behest. It was doing this on behalf of Ukraine. Ukraine gave the FBI this list and asked them to do this for them, and the FBI complied. And my name was on that list, along with some Russian journalists and other voices, some Ukrainians also, who had challenged the government. And the rest of the media, when this came out, just yawned. It wasn't seem to be a big deal that the FBI is getting involved in trying to censor journalists and voices that the Ukrainian government doesn't like. And that's a reflection of how integrated U.S. media has become with the state and identifies with it. And the only thing I can do is just keep doing my job and following the facts where they lead, and not worried about these efforts to intimidate people like myself, because luckily there are people out there who recognize that U.S. media, Western media has not done its job.
One here
they're hungry for independent voices, and it's the support of people who want to.
You're allowed to store personal items in your pocket.
Allows independent journalism like myself to continue.
Are you familiar with the Trusted News Initiative and their apparent
You're right.
to
just
curate?
They don't want it to end up in the product. So
the explicit acknowledgement that they are no longer competing with one another, and by they I mean,
you skipped the last page completely here.
CNN, BBC, they're competing with independent media, certainly in a practical sense in terms of for viewers and for an audience, but in an ideological sense for control of the.
If you have any questions about those, though, I've been willing to help you.
Channels, a little bit. Currently, because of the kind of work that you do and many of your colleagues and peers, we are actually given legitimate, reliable information that's often at odds with the information that's conveyed from within this.
End up in the product. Basically, that's the same reason they don't want you to have jewelry on and all that stuff.
Are you aware of the kind of relationships that now exist between mainstream media organizations, how explicit and overt that it has become.
Yeah, especially in the UK.
I prefer not.
Initiatives like the Integrity
because
Initiative,
things fall
and
off.
many other
you know.
associated programs.
They will let you wear a wedding band as long as there's no stones in it.
And they do it in a very clever way.
Bands
they
are fine.
Fund all these different groups around
That
the
have to be
world and
wedding
make it seem as if these are independent watchdogs and independent investigators, but really they're just there to serve the state. One prominent example is Bellingcat, which is billed in US media as this open source website, this collection of digital Sherlocks who are out there just to find the truth. But if you look at their output, it's almost entirely done in the service of their NATO state sponsors because they are funded by programs like the National Endowment for Democracy, which sounds, harmless, but is actually historically a front for US intelligence and accordingly serves the bidding of US intelligence goals, and which is mainly to destabilize foreign countries that the US government wants to overthrow. So if you look at Bellingcat's output, they often put out these so-called investigations that serve whatever narrative the US government wants to sustain. And when the US media reports on them, they never mention that they're funded by US taxpayers. They never mention that they're funded by contractors like Adam Smith International that have made a lot of money off of working in war zones destabilized by the US, like Iraq. And that's how it works. And most people don't have the time to go and do research projects and look up who all these various groups are that are being presented to them as credible, non-biased sources. And those of us who do point out that they're funded by the state, we're then marginalized for it. But the facts are there for people who have the time to go find them out.
There appear to be a spate
Yep.
of
First shift goes from 5 a.m. to 3:30 p.m.
Safety
and the
bills.
second shift goes from 3:30 p.m. to 2 a.m. 10-hour shifts, so you don't have to do 4 days.
Appears to be a censorship bill offering empowerment. Again, curious
2 a.m.
agencies to sort of check encrypted emails and messages, often under the auspices of safety and ideas and subjects that most people would be in agreement of, hate speech, pornography, in particular pornography.
Hi. Can I help you?
Minors and stuff. And so
we're doing by appointment.
it seems that that's not just
when would you be available to
UK,
come
it's
in
happening
and do that?
in the United States, in all of the 5
After today, we booked up today. Huh? You did call up here? Oh, okay. I told you 3. I told you 3.
Do you ever feel that when something appears to be so highly coordinated,
You might have called
there
our
appears to
Toledo
be
office by
cooperation
accident.
at the legislative
Huh?
level that goes even beyond
No, this is
national
West First
sovereignty
Street,
and
but I'm the
seems
only
to
person answers the
bypass
phone at
democracy.
my office here.
Voices like
Did you speak to
yours and
Bectrum or
even
did you
the
speak
grey
to
zone, maybe
the
even
staffing
entire
company? I mean,
space
okay, yeah.
are going to be
That's fine.
limited unless there's a.
I mean, I actually have some time if you guys want to go through the process.
Politicized and
Do you have your
activated
IDs and
that
stuff
it
like
can
that?
no longer really
Oh,
claim
you just
to
with
be
them?
like,
Yeah,
"Hey,
no worries.
notice this." It
Have a seat at the great table and I'll come grab it from you.
Politicized, and it has to
Yeah,
become
perfect.
ultimately.
Yeah, if you're willing to
about
work, man, I'm willing to get you
opposition
working.
to the way
I just
that the
first day off
trend
vacation,
and
so I'm like
tendency
literally very
of
so
authoritarianism
the
and
process may
censorship
take a
and
minute.
surveillance. It's not enough, is it, Aaron, to just simply draw attention to this stuff? Isn't there a point where we have to do more?
No, absolutely. And it's a legitimate fear. I mean, look how broadly society as a whole has sort of accepted the torture of Julian Assange. This is a guy who put out facts to the world to expose state crimes. And for that, he's been harassed, persecuted by the world's most powerful states, confined right now to a prison for many years, now facing extradition to the US. And yes, there have been some laudable fights to free him. I mean, you've taken part in the demonstrations to free Julian Assange, but overall in society, it's people kind of yawn. They don't pay attention. When I go to free Julian Assange rallies in New York City, it's a lot of people who are elderly. Young people have been sort of denied the basics of the story and don't realize the implications for them and for their future. And that's a result of a really successful demonization campaign against Julian. And that extends to all areas of the media, where we sort of normalize this culture where dissenting voices can be censored, can be deplatformed, can be smeared as Russian agents. And members of the media don't see this as an assault on their own rights because they don't identify with journalists who actually do their job. They identify with the state. And yeah, I don't know what it's going to take, but certainly in the absence of grassroots pressure, it's going to be increasingly normalized.
He is held, or at least the extradition is as a result of an attempt to charge him and prosecute him under the Espionage Act that Barack Obama used, I feel, more than any president in history. And there is this curious, beyond the Fisher, I suppose, there are almost alternate realities where statesmen are still regarded as heroic in spite of observable, tangible, empirical facts now. And it appears to me that, like, as you say, there's a kind of normalization of a phenomena and abomination, like Assange's ongoing imprisonment, or Edward Snowden's exile, or the numerous whistleblowers in incarceration, you know, before standing up against, in particular, sort of American corporate state interests. And when you say that thing about it, sort of, you know, before you said it's usually older people, I was thinking you were going to say like the usual suspects, the kind of people that will group and corral around any issue, the sort of people that you might have imagined caring about the campaign for nuclear disarmament, the people that are aware that there's this sort of march of history that has sped up with the introduction of technology, all of the opportunities that for communication and independent media and dissenting voices that this new space has afforded. There is plainly a colonial war.
The ones that are pending just means I have to do my portion. So as long as none of them say input, you're good. Just go ahead and log off, and you can have a seat back over at the break table.
To popularize, like, you know, me and you, we sort of talk about it, but I'm not down at sort of
yes,
demanding his
release. Yes, sir, it is both.
You know, I think we're going to speak.
No food or beverages in your locker though. There's a place in the break room for that.
But it's, in a sense,
and that's literally the only one you missed in this whole test.
That it's older people that are more schooled in more overt 80s and 90s style, you know, Iraq war disasters and lies and the weapons of mass destruction. Do you feel like that almost people are lacking the inner resources to oppose? That, like, that there's a generation that is this generational, because certainly your answer suggested that it might be. Is there a kind of a lack of understanding or direction or hope?
Kenneth, I'm going to have you have a seat at the computer.
It means that this issue is able to continue broadly unopposed.
And
well, I think the biggest issue is that younger people lack the material resources. In the U.S., we don't have healthcare guaranteed for everybody. It's a tough economy. It's a very individualistic culture. There's not much social support. And in that context, people don't have the time to worry about global problems, but, you know, bigger issues. They have to worry about supporting themselves and, you know, their own careers and their own lives. And it, you know, and to debunk Western state propaganda, it takes a Herculean research effort, because, you know, it's very easy to hear the narrative, for example, about the war in Ukraine, like Russia just invaded Ukraine because it wanted to colonize it. You can say that in a few seconds. For me to present a contrary point of view, I need like 5 minutes to go into like the coup in 2014, the Minsk Accords, NATO expansion, the placement of U.S. missiles in countries surrounding Russia, all these things that require context. People don't have the time for that. At least as much as they used to. So I think there's a direct connection between denying people the basics that they need to survive and their inability then to oppose what the U.S. is doing around the world. It's like the system works really, really well for people in power, because you force people to scramble for themselves, and meanwhile you take their money and spend it on these horrible military ventures. And because people lack the resources to you know, have the time to do their own research and to read and to absorb all the information that they need, while also being denied the information by their state media,
which is hard to get
room for resistance to government policy.
It's just medical in Ohio right now.
Meanwhile, you also have a constant pool.
But they give me a medical discount here in Michigan, even though they say they don't accept it. If I show them that card, I get it.
Being in the military offers you college tuition, offers you health care.
It's kind of up to the dispensary, though.
Of people that the U.S. can always draw on to go.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's all up.
From that point of view,
personally, I don't think it should be legalized. I think it should be just completely decriminalized.
Genuine grassroots opposition to
legalizing it means that they get to tax you.
By dealing in vast territories across huge demographics, is able to orchestrate control. There's a sort of set of interlocking systems, right down to the ability
decades.
to recruit from an underclass that you've just described, the intransigence somehow of deception. Churchill's famous quote that, you know,
said even
lies
traffic laws,
halfway around the world before the truth's got
majority of them
a
are
chance to pull
just
its
a
trousers off, you know,
revenue
and
generation.
Mine says, like we live in a world of immersive.
I call the cops you see on the side of the road pirates.
Wait a minute, there was that coup in 2014. Hang on now, NATO expansion. Wait a sec, there's these bio.
And I got family that are in law enforcement.
Meanwhile, there's just a constant
they know how I
opposition. And when I'm listening to you and getting the benefit of your research and experience, I'm also sort of like the needle of my mind skips.
One of my favorite terms is back to blue until it happens to you.
Think that only decentralization can present a real real opposition, because as long as you have the ability to marshal entire populations, to control vast economies, to suppress dissent, you are not allowed organic uprising. You're not allowed people to say, well, we want to live like this here. We're not going to participate in that. Well, we don't believe this. Like it is literally systemic. It is an unconscious, ongoing, very potent system that can only be destabilized by mass opposition. And as you say, the people that are required to participate in that mass opposition are unable to pay their energy bills, are unable to pay their food bills, are kind of weary from poor food and bad pharma and screens continually broadcasting messages of either nihilism or despair or hopeless pursuit of individual desire. There's the sort of kind of moral and spiritual, in fact, landscape that this takes place in does not provide a lot of opportunity. And in particularly, there's a sort of at ontological depth, atomization, a breakdown of almost every reliable unit, whether it's the family or faith or community.
5 a.m. to 3:30 p.m.
Components that might be used to build meaning.
It's actually, I'm going to give you a copy of the actual schedule and everything, but the last paper that you're going to sign there actually shows it all.
Your bag, although we've never really talked about it. So I'm presuming.
But on the handbook, it's just a copy of that last
paper. To the
paper.
possibility and, in my view, necessity for an individual personal awakening where I recognize, wait, none of these external things are going to work for me. I need a new vision. I need a new mode of living. We've become just uprooted from the conditions of our origin. We've become uprooted from simple ideals that, you know, gosh, sometimes are adjacent to totemism that could just guide us through, well, we are a tribe and the tribe has these concerns and we have these responsibilities for one another. And this is how we handle justice. And this is how we, you know, like those kind of things are just lost in an ideological diaspora, you know, and I don't see sort of how to do that, how without some kind of new covenant to mobilize people again. And that's why I continually, Aaron, think about the necessity for independent media to become a kind of crusade, you know, an inclusive crusade.
Well, listen, I'm all for a spiritual awakening. I also don't know how to get there beyond just speaking the truth and giving people information that they're being denied to keep people isolated and fragmented and obedient. Beyond that, I don't know what the solution is, but certainly I agree. There needs to be a spiritual awakening, and it's very, very hard to do that in this society. But I can point to examples throughout history that where people in much worse conditions than those of us broadly in the West face have done extraordinary things. In the poorest countries in the Americas, in Haiti and Bolivia, there in the last 30 years, there have been grassroots movements that have elected presidents that actually come from the people. Jean-Bertrand Aristide in Haiti and Evo Morales in Bolivia. These are two of the poorest countries in the hemisphere. So if they can do it under much worse conditions, maybe we could too. Maybe we could follow their lead. But I agree, the West is in such a, you know, the North, the UK, US, countries like that, there's such a huge bubble of propaganda, and there's so many sources to keep people isolated and hating each other and, you know, at each other's throats rather than targeting and demanding accountability from the elites. That it's very, very difficult.
This, you know, post from Anthony Blinken, I think something maybe commented on.
O.H. Monroe.
Anthony Blinken said,
Wow.
On
Way up on top. Hang on.
Democracy depends on free and open exchange of ideas, including online. On this international day of democracy, I call on governments around the world to protect citizens' access to information that allows them to make
On target stat, I never heard of it.
It seems like an extraordinary thing to say in light of what's happening. Currently the war that we spoke about at the beginning of our conversation, in light of Assange's ongoing incarceration. It's interesting how
you're not in the right
rhetoric of government is detached from any principles.
I had to close it because that portal's not correct.
He is presiding over the persecution of a publisher whose only crime was that he exposed state crimes.
Before you even fill anything out, let me see here.
He released it. He didn't steal it himself.
Do this now. All right, you're filling the other stuff. Sorry, you got to do that over.
Which he released through WikiLeaks. He exposed state crimes, and for that, he gets persecuted, tortured, locked in a cage with no end in sight. Now he's facing extradition to the U.S. And Anthony Blinken has the gall to say he cares about democracy and media freedom and free expression. And you can go down the list. Joe Biden recently spoke at the United Nations, and he accused Russia of dismantling arms control between the U.S. and Russia, which is a very, very big problem. And he cited the fact that Russia had suspended some of its compliance with the New START treaty, which is the last treaty limiting the nuclear weapon stockpiles of the U.S. and Russia. What Biden didn't mention is that the U.S. for the last 20 years, has been on a crusade to dismantle arms control treaties. John Bolton, under the Bush administration, pulled the U.S. out of the ABM treaty, which was a vital treaty that helped prevent nuclear war. Then Trump came along and brought Bolton back and tore up the INF treaty, which had eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapons. And this has allowed the U.S. to build up more weapons threatening Russia. And Joe Biden goes before the UN and somehow says that Russia is at fault, not looking at his own government's role in dismantling all of these vital arms control treaties. And that's just what you can do when you don't have a media that does its job, when it doesn't point out the hypocrisies, the glaring hypocrisies right in front of us. And so
it took that first part. So let me pull you. You're going to be in the system now, so let me just pull it up, and it's going to log you in, and then,
for example, imprisoning Julian Assange. It just doesn't happen. So
I should have noticed it whenever you had to redo it this first time. So let me.
One of the stories that I think has meant that you've incurred the ire that you have done involved an alleged chemical attack in Douma, Syria. Am I right in thinking that there's a new inquiry into whether or not there was a cover-up there, Aaron?
Well, we've been talking a lot about how the media serves the establishment and parrots its narratives, especially when it comes to war. And this is, to me, you couldn't have a better example than the story of Douma in Syria. Because what you have basically is the US, UK, and France bombing Syria in April 2018 over allegations that Syria committed a chemical attack. And this came shortly after images were released from Douma of dozens of dead bodies, horrific scenes, people foaming at the mouth. And based on that, and based on claims from sectarian insurgents that Syria was guilty, the US government led the way in bombing Syria. And about a year later, the OPCW, the world's top chemical weapons watchdog, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, came out with this report saying that basically the US narrative was correct, that Syria was responsible for this attack. But then we got a whole bunch of leaks from inside the OPCW showing that the investigators who went to Syria to investigate this reached the opposite conclusion. They actually found there was no evidence of a chemical attack. And if you read their reports, their leaked reports closely, you can see that
Are you still at the same address?
In fact, this was staged on the ground by insurgents.
All right.
But all that was censored. And the investigation, as we know of from these leaks and from
what we're going to do is, you're already in here. I forgot you were just here in April.
And the media, despite these allegations and documented allegations of a cover-up at a global chemical weapons watchdog, the media has completely censored this story. So now, when they still report on the Douma incident, they don't even acknowledge the existence of the OPCW whistleblowers or their leaks. It's like they don't exist.
Put in a temporary password, and then you can put in what you want.
It's a complete erasure.
So it's your first name dot last name is your username.
Once you acknowledge the OPCW whistleblowers,
now put what you want the password to be.
Acknowledge the leaked documents that have come out, which I've reported on a lot at the Gray Zone, have also come out from WikiLeaks as well. Then the facts are overwhelming that there was not evidence of a chemical attack and that the investigation was censored. And so rather than allow people to hear about this, the media just simply erases it. And so now we have a new stage where a group of former diplomats.
Yeah, it has to be 8 characters. You have to have an uppercase, lowercase number, and a symbol, just like the temporary password on the paper on the wall here. Has to be in that same.
Have submitted a report.
It's because it has your financial information in there. They don't want it to be an easy
detail. It's the
4-digit thing.
Thorough look at this cover up to date, and the facts are just.
All right, Victor, I'm gonna bring the last part.
In the early stages of this OPCW probe, the team went to Germany to meet with some expert German toxicologists, and these toxicologists said unequivocally, this could not have been a chlorine gas attack. And their conclusions were erased. And even the fact that the OPCW went and met with these German toxicologists, that was erased as well. So in a timeline of the investigation from the OPCW, they erased the fact that these German toxicologists were even consulted. And the reason is clear is because the Germans said that there was no evidence of a chemical attack. And one of them even said, according to leaked minutes of the meeting, that this looks like this was possibly staged on
some of the materials.
And so this report from what's called the Berlin Group 21, which is again includes Jose Bustani, the founding director general of the OPCW, also Hans von Smonek, who is a former assistant secretary general of the UN, goes through this cover-up in detail. And again, no media coverage that I can see in the West of this. It's just too inconvenient to the narrative. But they're an example of people in the West who are determined to see accountability for this cover-up, because this isn't just about an international organization being compromised to serve pro-war narratives. This isn't just about the U.S. and its allies bombing Syria on false grounds. This is about dozens of people being killed.
Any questions at all? We'll do that.
The investigation into their deaths
First name, last name.
censored, and so we still do not know how they died. And so for their sake alone, there needs to be accountability. And for that to happen, the OPCW whistleblowers need to be heard. The documented acts of censorship need to be accounted for. And these diplomats, these former diplomats, are trying to see that through. And I really salute their efforts, and I'm pretty sure there will be more from them and others who are concerned about this cover-up.
It's pretty incredible, Aaron, that you're able to control, or at least observe and contain, and describe and delineate all of this information in the light
update your contact info,
ongoing, or at least in the
email if it's different address,
ongoing attacks and attempts to discredit. I know sometimes, for myself, I know you've traveled extensively and you've reported from the places that you talk about as well, so it's much more experiential for you. I know sometimes it feels abstract to me, and that, in a sense, it's the only way I can handle it is by looking at it as, hold on, this piece of information, that piece of information, look at, and of course what I do is nothing like as deep as what you're engaged in. It's sort of much more podria of information taken from all over the place. But the fact that you're able to do that so extensively and so optimistically is really encouraging. I don't know, how do you keep yourself together? How do you stop? What do you do when you're not thinking about this? How's your small talk?
I take the work I do very seriously. I don't take myself seriously, and I don't think the work has anything to do with my own personality and my own ego. The facts are the facts, and I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I can try to do what I can to bring them out. And I also feel strongly about these issues. I mean, for example, when Syria is accused of chemical attacks, that isn't just used to justify bombings of Syria, like the one that happened in April 2018. It's also used to justify sanctions. And the sanctions, we're told, are just against Assad and his government. In fact, it's the people of Syria exclusively who are targeted by this. Government officials are never, ever harmed. It's the people of Syria. And I saw that firsthand when I was there. So to help expose the truth on these critical matters, it's not just to bring accountability to a cover-up, which is very serious. It's also to expose the lies that are used to justify torturing entire populations.
Like you already did
nothing to do with their government, who just want to be able to live. But unfortunately, because they live in societies controlled by governments that the U.S. and its allies want to overthrow, they have to suffer. And that motivates me a lot. When I went to Syria, it made me very, very angry.
All right, now I'm going to load the forms for you. I'm just going to log in and fill that out. More than anything, because it's been pretty recent. So
under occupation.
And so as I'm 1 second, let me load the forms, and then you'll pop back in to do the
Western governments that are used to justify sadistic crimes like murder and sanctions on civilians. And none of that has anything to do with me. I'm just in a position where I can do something about it. And so I try to do that just by doing my job.
Oh, yeah, you're a real journalist. I get it. There's not many like you. there's not many like you. That thing where it's like I keep myself out of it, I stay with the facts, but I've sort of seen it in Matt Taibbi and even in sort of an old codger like Seymour Hersh, you know, like that people that are like able to sort of go, well, I'm just giving you information. So I'm just, you know, hey, what can I tell you? It's there's a, what do I want to call that? There's a sort of stoicism in that is very, very beautiful, very encouraging. Aaron, thanks very much for coming on. Thanks for demonstrating what journalistic integrity looks like. Thanks for not dramatizing it, but expressing and conveying how serious and at times dramatic it is without becoming attached to it. There's a sort of an important lesson in that for me there that I really appreciate. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Russell.
Cheers, man. You can follow Aaron's writing on his Substack, of course, and you can support his work at the Grey Zone. That's go to spot.fund. And support the work of the Grey Zone if you bloody well can. Hopefully, this is by going to Spot.
Go log back in.
Careful now how you fund the Grey Zone. That money can go missing. We know that. Spot.fund/defend the Grey Zone. Again, we'll put a link in the description to wherever you're watching this now. Thanks again, Aaron. I appreciate this fantastic conversation. Tomorrow, we will be joined by Dr. Robert Epstein talking about how Google manipulates us and how they apparently shifted millions of votes in favor of Biden. Now, let me be clear. We're not saying that there's been any voter corruption, but there has been a manipulation, and we're going to discuss that tomorrow. If you click the red button on the screen now, you can become an awakened wonder, support our community. Obviously, you know how much we need your support now. In addition to supporting us and keeping our voice alive, you'll get guided meditations, extended interviews, Q&As, and so much more, particularly
this one, you're just going to check the box, and you got a written copy of the deal already.
But for more of the different, until then, if you can, please stay free.
Got your handbook already. All right, go ahead and fill that out. Okay. Actually, let's do this one first.
Throughout history, Iceland has displayed an immense tradition of witchcraft. Within the horrifically oppressive landscape, magic was not just on the fringes of society. It was a tool for everyday survival. This tradition persisted through Christianization in ways unseen across most of the developed world. Events that should have stamped out paganism entirely only seemed to galvanize Icelanders' conviction in their native culture. Today, pagan tradition lingers in Iceland in ways both mundane and tremendously significant. As a result, we now have access to the contents of
spellbooks. We do that. That's
when you enter the facility, they show you where the step-by-step procedures of medieval
maps are on the wall, basically, as soon as you walk in.
This documentary will cover the entirety of witchcraft in Iceland, from its earliest inhabitants' blood sacrifices.
I said that to the client. They just go off on that when
you
the
start. Surprising presence of pagan tradition in modern-day Iceland. The subject is dark, esoteric, and at times bizarre. But at the end of it, we can take away a tremendous lesson about
the base for first shift is 14. Now, second shift has $1 an hour differential.
In the late 9th century, King Harold Finehair was looking to conquer all.
Either shift, though, they pay a weekly
political influence of Christian Europe. He had agreed to bring the nation under a Christian-style monarchy. Citizens were not entirely enthused by the idea.
Show up every day on time.
So a group of Norwegians left to seek political and religious freedom. These people, along with their Celtic slaves, sailed west to Iceland. The society they set up on Iceland was rooted firmly in their native heritage. There was no single king on Iceland, but rather the land was ruled by local priest chieftains. These leaders would meet annually at a great assembly called the Althing to settle legal cases and decide broader matters of governance. Even today, the Althing remains as Iceland's national parliament. The early Icelandic government had very little central authority. They could make rulings in disputes, but had no ability to actually carry out these sentences. Instead, that was left to the family of the aggrieved party. Often, if someone was found guilty of a crime, they would be outlawed in the sense that the law no longer applied to that individual. They could then be harmed or killed without any legal repercussions. Alternatively, the guilty party could pay a set amount of money to the harmed individual, called weregild, to satisfy as punishment. Each crime was assigned a respective monetary value. It should also be noted that the government made no profit on any of these crimes or rulings. Early Icelandic settlers practiced a religion they brought with them from Norway. It was an ancient Germanic-based sort of heathenism. That is, heathenism not as a pejorative, but just to say these people did not practice one of the more now widespread religions. This Icelandic pagan religion allowed a significant amount of individual freedom. Some Icelanders may have worshipped Odin, while some prayed to Freya or other Norse deities. Alternatively, some likely worshipped nothing at all. Meanwhile, the Celtic slaves they had brought probably had some ties to Christianity. This is all to say, Icelanders were very tolerant of religious differences. But still, paganism was the prevailing religion at the time. And within this paganism existed a strong tradition of sorcery. By all accounts, Icelandic magic could be separated into two distinct types, Galdur and Seidr. Galdur is generally a more honorable magic, whereas Seidr was considered shameful, essentially light and dark magic. These moral connotations, though, were not of the contemporary. Rather, they seem to be added later on, possibly under a different framework of morality than would have been present at the time, so take light and dark magic labels with a grain of salt. More accurately, the differences between these two magics were technical in nature. The practice of Galdur seems more based in a person's consciousness. You could perhaps say it is the more grounded of the two, for lack of a better term. In Galdur, you would assume a sort of magical persona, an alter ego, whereas in Seidr, the practitioner would enter a trance-like state, seemingly possessed by something else entirely. It is similar to what other parts of the world may call shamanism. Likely inherited from early Germanic practices, early Icelandic magic also sees the frequent use of runes, a sort of esoteric alphabet. Runic magicians would have been the most well-known. It was likely practiced by the most well-honored members of society. These were, perhaps unsurprisingly, mostly men. This male-dominated quality of Icelandic magic will again show its face later when we get to the witchcraft trials and executions. The general technique of runic magic consisted of 3 procedural steps. First, the magician would carve the signs into an object. Then it would be colored with the magician's blood, or the blood of an animal. And finally, a verbal incantation would be spoken over the runes. This incantation was said to load the runes with their magical powers. But these perhaps primitive, old-world ways of magic would soon be dramatically changed by increasing Christianization of Europe. By the year 1000, most of Northern Europe, including Norway, Denmark, Ireland, and England, had become officially Christian. Icelanders, though, were resistant to this change. By most accounts, Iceland accepted Christianity quite superficially. When the faith arrived, very little changed. Public sacrifices were forbidden, but there were no laws against the private practicing of the old faith. Pagan traditions continued with no real resistance. These traditions included the ceremonial sacrifice and eating of horse flesh. Icelanders also permitted the exposure of infants. This practice was a version of infanticide, wherein a family left their unwanted newborn baby outside to be killed one way or another by the forces of nature. Conversion to Christianity was a decades-long, quite gradual process, but it was accelerated around the year 1030. Around this time, Iceland entered the Age of Peace. Domestic conflicts were less frequent, and individual Icelanders became more open to investigating Christianity. Icelandic scholars began to travel abroad and return with Christian knowledge. Still, Icelandic Christianity was not exactly by the book. The Icelanders who joined the church did not renounce worldly pleasures, far from it. Old traditions like polygamy and witchcraft persisted, even among church members. These old practices mixed with the Christian ideas that were being imported by traveling clergymen. This era of Icelandic witchcraft will forever be remembered as bizarre and self-contradictory. Christian faiths explicitly said that witchcraft was heretical, but Christianity began appearing all throughout Icelandic magical practices. Personalities from exclusively Judeo-Christian traditions began to appear in Icelandic spellbooks. Elements of Catholicism were incorporated into verbal incantations. Unfortunately, this era also represents something of a dark age in our knowledge of Icelandic magic. The works composed during this time depicted earlier Viking Age practices. Very few original magical materials were recorded during this era. Instead, we must rely on sagas and folk tales written after the fact. While not entirely true, Icelandic sagas are typically based in reality to a degree. They are essentially embellishments of true events. Most significantly, they point to a priest named Sæmundur Sigfússon. He is said to be the most magically learned man of his time. It said that he attended a mysterious institute called the Black School of Satan, which was likely located in Germany or France. Despite this perhaps frightening resume, Sigfússon was regarded quite well as a good guy. Indeed, this Black School of Satan continues to reappear throughout ancient Icelandic magical texts. It was apparently quite a popular destination for those who wished to dedicate their whole lives to sorcery. The Age of Peace began to break down around 1118. Other nations were wrestling for control over Iceland, as foreign pressures manifested in political conspiracies and corruption. This instability leaked through Icelandic society. Old patterns of domestic feuds and blood vengeance began to reappear. But it was during this time that Icelandic culture,
the question, which of the following statements is true? It's the one: I am not allowed to wear my steel toe or composite shoes beyond.
Poet Snorri
Basically, they don't
Sturluson
want you
wrote
wearing
the
your shoes
prose
to and
Edda.
from work for
The poetic
contamination.
Edda was also
There's a
devoted
locker
to
room
paper.
there.
It was a great time for cultural balance between the past and present.
Put them in your car.
Icelanders sort of agreed upon a national Catholicism, wherein indigenous traditions were allowed
Yeah, they
to
just prefer
survive
that you not,
alongside Christianity.
you know.
Unfortunately,
I don't know
this
how
time
strict they
would
enforce
not
that. I'm just
last.
saying that's you'll see that question.
They don't want the outside service coming in.
Even though
Protestant
your
Reformation
first day,
began
you can
early
report in the ones you've been wearing around all day.
1536,
So I think-
Denmark nationally accepted this Reformation, and as its
Yeah,
property, Iceland
it's the answer
was
to the
expected
question.
to
Is
follow
basically what I'm
suit.
going to say.
Once again, there emerged enormous
you're
pressure
done
on
there.
Iceland to adopt European Christian
Second.
tradition.
We'll go over a
And
couple
once
things with
again,
you.
Icelanders resisted. The country's isolation and cultural conservatism meant that Reformation did not exactly take quick hold. In Iceland, there was effectively a low-effort war between the years of 1536 and 1550. Protestants won and executed the Icelandic bishop Jan Arason in 1550. The years that followed
any of
were
you
marked by
interested
economic
in
and
actually
political
working in this
exploitation
building?
by the Danish in Iceland.
You are?
In 1602, Denmark effectively
It's only day
prohibited
shift, though,
Iceland
you know.
from trading
All right.
with whoever it pleased.
I need someone.
The result was a period of
I'm
intense
going to need one
economic
more. We
hardship.
normally don't
Danish
have hardly
traders
anybody
and
working over
clergymen
here,
who were
but they're getting
essentially
so busy they
Danish
need an extra
government
person. And
agents
that's why.
ruthlessly
Huh?
exploited Icelanders.
Well, just at least
1/4 of church tithes in Iceland went directly to the
I have
Danish
to,
king.
because you're returning
Death
so soon
penalty
from the
was
last
proposed
time.
for moral
I just got to get a
crimes,
quick approval
heresy.
from them too. So.
The estates of
Not a
anyone
big deal.
sentenced to
Usually
death
isn't an
again
issue.
went directly to the Danish crown.
Anytime I'm returning
Variants,
somebody
both
that
Danish
quickly,
and Icelandic,
they
seeing
ask.
signs of a collapse, began a concentrated and intentional effort to save Icelandic literary heritage. Among these historical documents were
All right,
spell
Matthew,
books and magical
have you slide over to the
manuscripts.
computer?
So we have a lot of information about magic from this
No,
time.
you can sit down.
Later in this video, when we discuss the methods and techniques of Icelandic
So I'm going to
witchcraft,
get everything
most of
ready
that will have
because
been
I'm pretty
produced
sure
in this era.
as long as I give them the okay, the
Two
recommendation. What
Icelandic
shift were you
magicians
interested
serve as the bridge into the Protestant age in Iceland. One was Gottskálk Niklason the Cruel. Gottskálk had a reputation for black magic and was known to be a ruthless political schemer. The other was Halfdan Arfason. Little is known about Halfdanr other than he appeared to be a white magician to Gottskálk's black magician status. The sorcerer Gottskálk's spellbook was called the
How did you want to get paid?
Written in gold letters in red
You want a
parchment,
pay card?
this book is said to
me
include
see
the
if you-
darkest magic.
Did you have a pay card
known
last
to man,
time?
mostly sourced from earlier heathen times. After Gottskálk's death,
Yeah, just I mean, if it's
magician
if you
named
had one with
Galdr
us before,
Loftur
it's,
apparently
we just do
became
it as a
obsessed
replacement
with the
rather than
practice of
re-register a new
necromancy, of
card.
raising the dead. He
You had
desperately tried
CashApp,
to raise the
yeah.
ghost of Gottskálk to get the dark sorcerer's
But you
personal
did have a
spellbook.
rapid card.
Galdr Loftur's sin and the moral of the
Yes, you
saga
did.
in which he
Oh,
appears
did
is
you
a
ever
sort of
activate it?
unending lust for knowledge and power.
Let me see the dates here.
In this era, there's also the Graskina.
No,
This book
you
is
didn't.
supposed to have been compiled of two parts. First written in the Roman alphabet, and the second encoded in runes. intended
Yeah,
to
if
conceal
if they can get into your phone, they can.
According to the sagas, the souls of those who read the first part could still be saved, but if a person were to read the second, they were damned for eternity. Copies of these books did not survive. It would not be hard to imagine why. Protestant era crackdown of magic in Iceland meant they would be immediately burned if and when they were found. And indeed, Iceland eventually did crack down on the so perceived threat of witchcraft. On October 12, 1617, King Christian IV of Denmark officially outlawed magic in all of his lands, which included Denmark, Norway, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, and Greenland. Non-sorcerer citizens, those who only casually practiced magic, would be punished by exile or through a fine. Genuine sorcerers, as the king said, could only be sentenced to death. Immediately after the decree went into effect, witch trials appeared all across the Danish kingdom, with the exception of Iceland. There, the law took 13 years to be published by local officials, and when it was published, the decree was met with confusion. This widespread European notion of witchcraft being evil had never really been introduced in Iceland.
Oh, so you're in there too. All right, let me pull you up.
Difficult for Icelandic authorities to carry out the laws in an organized, effective way. People didn't really have protocols for imprisoning and executing a magician, nor did they really understand why these punishments were even necessary. The result was basically chaos. Many of the suspected witches in Iceland were executed without a trial. Only after being executed were their crimes then reported to local councils. Between 1625 and 1683, a total of 170 Icelanders were accused of witchcraft. 21 people were executed. Notably, only one of these executed people was a woman. Icelandic witches were generally men. This is a significant contrast to witch trials throughout the rest of Europe, where victims were overwhelmingly women. Icelandic society was very much divided by gender at the time. Knowledge like that required to carry out magic was considered a masculine trait. In Iceland, women were believed to have less knowledge and therefore less understanding of magic. However, there were some exceptions. A handful of women were brought to trial for witchcraft. Certain genres of magic were, in fact, decidedly female. They were generally looked down on by other sorcerers. In addition to gender, Icelandic witch trials were drawn along class lines. Almost all victims of the trials were men in the lower classes. On the rare occasion that a person of higher status was accused, they would generally be acquitted of any charges. Most of the detailed records of these witch trials were lost, if they ever existed at all. Record keeping within the courts wasn't as robust as it is today. Most accounts of witch trials would have come from first-hand witnesses casually writing down what they had seen. That said, there is one major exception. One witch trial over a single man's grievances and claims of possession and demonic practice spanned the course of 5 years. This is known as the Kirkjubol affair. It took place from the years 1655 to 1660. The story tells us the procedural workings of witch trials, but it also offers more than that. It provides insight into the cultural dynamics at play when one was accused of being a witch. More specifically, the power of these accusations when cast from the right person. The affair centers around a reverend named Jon Magnusson. The reverend's life was wholly unremarkable prior to the Kirkjubol affair. Born in 1610 in northwest
so the
Iceland,
username is going to be
his
your
father
first
was a
name,
priest,
last name,
his
and that's
brother,
the temporary
so
password.
Jon continued with that familial tradition. In 1643, Jon became the head of a parish, and about a decade
It'll take you to
later,
an application, but it'll you click on employee
married,
login.
and his
Go
wife
ahead.
had a child. It was this year, though, that Jon suffered.
And the second shift, you said Monday? All right, well, that gives time to get approval and everything
His
to bring you
son,
back.
also named Jon Jonsson. Younger
Monday
Jon,
is
at this
second.
point, asked the
Thank you.
Reverend for his daughter's hand in marriage. The Reverend refused, which created a rift between the two families.
Call me
One day,
Thursday.
The Reverend was walking through town. The
and,
Kirkjubol
I should have
farm
it
where
by
the
then. If I
Jonssons
get it
lived
before then, I'll
was
reach out to
route.
you personally.
He
so.
approached the farm. The Reverend claimed to have received a mysterious message in his mind. Something told him to go visit the Jonssons. So he did. He spoke with them, ate dinner, and ended up staying the night at the Jonssons' farm. During the night, the Reverend woke up to the sensation of mice crawling all over his bed. But when he looked down beneath the covers, there were no signs of any mice. The next day, the elder Jon Jonsson drunkenly confessed to having used witchcraft on the Reverend. He said that he sent a spirit to haunt the Reverend while he slept. But the elder Jon claimed he was satisfied with the mischief and would never do it again. The Reverend Jon believed him and went on his way. Some days later, the town had gathered at church service. There, the Jonssons' servant girl complained to the elder Jon about his son. The younger Yon overheard and punched the servant girl in her face. Reverend Yon saw it all and made the younger Yon apologize. That night, the Reverend was sleeping when he was again startled awake by the feeling of a cat walking across his feet. But when he looked down at his feet, there was no animal again. At this point, he said his mind was suddenly plagued with evil, demonic thoughts. The Reverend began to pray, desperately, at his bedside. While praying, he felt a beast jump onto his body. He felt its claws rip through his clothes and into his flesh. The pain, he said, was so intense, so red hot, that he believed himself to be in mortal danger. Again, though, there was no beast, only the feeling. These same sensations occurred for several nights in a row, apparently affecting other members of his family during this time. Deciding that this could only be the work of sorcery, Reverend Yon traveled across the fjord to visit the town sheriff. He reported his sufferings to the sheriff and several other town officials. The next day, as he was preaching in the church, the Reverend collapsed onto the ground, writhing in front of his parish in something of a mass spectacle. While this was happening, the Jonsens attempted to run out of the church, but were ultimately stopped. They were brought into custody. The sheriff sent a man named Geasley to the Kirkjubol farmstead to look for evidence of witchcraft. As he walked to the farm, Geasley claims to have felt bizarre, searing pains throughout his feet. At the farm, Geasley found a book made from calfskin that was filled with magical symbols and spells. With this evidence, the Jonsens were brought to court. The Reverend testified that they were using witchcraft against him, invoking Satan to bring him suffering. Several other church attendees testified against the Jonsens. Ultimately, the Jonsens were made to renounce any further acts of witchcraft. They agreed, and both parties were satisfied with the outcome. The very next night, the Reverend experienced more of the same painful attacks. These attacks, in fact, continued into the following year. That same year, 1656, the Jonsens were once again brought to trial. The Jonsens were allowed some time to collect witnesses on their behalf. But that very next night, the Reverend experienced pain like never before. He said the sound of whales' blowholes shot into his ears, keeping him awake and giving him an excruciating, burning headache. The Jonsens were arrested the next day. The younger Jon confessed to having an increasing and continuing interest in sorcery. He also confirmed that he had basically hated the Reverend since being denied his daughter's hand in marriage. Throughout the trial, the Jonsens both expressed a hatred for the Reverend and treated him with animosity and hostility. The two Jonsens apparently confessed in private quarters to town officials. They were then forced to make their confessions public. The elder Jon told the crowd that he was responsible for most of the Reverend's sufferings, that he had borrowed 2 spellbooks and enlisted the help of a sorcerer who lived near the town. The elder Jon confessed to a number of other pieces of witchcraft too. He said he'd used magic to kill people's livestock. Jon claimed he owned a number of magical books and runes that he had used on the Reverend. Following his father's confession, the younger Jon admitted to several incidents of his own. The younger Jon essentially confessed to being a sorcerer. He had used magic to hurt other townspeople. He said he'd harmed animals with magic and enchanted a girl to fall in love with him. The younger Jon claimed to regularly pour his own blood onto runic symbols. Ultimately, like the father, he too confessed to using magic on the Reverend. The penalty for using magic to inflict pain or death was, of course, burning at the stake. By confessing, the Jonsens had forfeited their lives in the eyes of the court. They were condemned to death to be burned alive on April 10, 1656. As the father and son were being brought to the stake, the Reverend offered them a chance to repent and to be forgiven by God. The elder John repented. He begged God for forgiveness. The younger John, though, refused wholeheartedly. Instead, in his last words, he said only, "May God grant us a good night." The two were tied to the stakes in front of a crowd. Quite ominously, it took officials 3 tries to get the father and son to burn, which many, the Reverend included, took as an omen of evil. Eventually, though, the Jonsens were burned alive in front of the townspeople. Even after the burning, though, the Reverend wanted more.
So pouch lands on the ground and goes into an animal feed container,
as well as court costs and lost time at work. The Reverend also claimed that the younger Jon had paid his legally required church tithe for a year. He argued that
no food or beverages in your locker. There's a
Jon's
place in the
property
break
should
room
be
for that.
forfeited to the church,
All right, it's
more
good though.
precisely to himself, the Reverend. Indeed, the Reverend was awarded much of the younger Jon's estate. But Reverend Yon was still not finished. He also argued that because the elder Yon was responsible for most of the witchcraft, he owed compensation.
And
So,
plus, it's
town
if it's
officials
refrigerated,
sold
they
most
lock
of
the
farm
refrigerators too.
Kirkubul's assets and gave the money to
They got
the Reverend.
padlocks on them.
Reverend Yon's symptoms
Because
eventually
people steal shit.
Initially, he believed the continuing attacks were the work of the younger Yon, haunting him from beyond the grave. But these attacks just got worse and worse. At one point, the Reverend began having seizures.
What did you
There
want
was
to do
also
for
a
direct
sister in
deposit?
the Jonson family named Thuri Thor. She lived on and off again at the Kirkubul farm. She quite reasonably held a
What I'm going to do is I'm going to send you
resentment
just
towards the
an
Reverend
email. It'll
for
have
the
2 links on it.
execution of her
One of
family.
them will be for insurance. If
The
you're not
Reverend
interested,
believed that
just
whenever
click on
Thuri
it,
Thor
log
came
in, and
to
just
town,
opt
his
out.
sufferings
The other one
became
will be for
worse.
direct deposit.
So he
Now,
accused
once you
her
do
of
submit
practicing
that,
witchcraft to exact
text the office
revenge
number
for
here.
her
Let me
brother's
know
death.
because I'm going to check it because sometimes
Learning
it
that
doesn't
this would
work.
develop from
And
accusations into an
if it
actual
doesn't, we'll do
trial,
it manually.
Thuri Thor left the town
Alright.
permanently.
What shift were
The
you?
Reverend intended to charge her with witchcraft in 3 different courts, all of which basically threw the charges out immediately. Even after Thuri Thor
Do you
was
know where
found
the
innocent,
main
Reverend
location you
did
said?
not let up. He
Your
kept accusing
girlfriend
her,
took you there by accident
declaring
anyway,
in
so yeah,
public
that's
that
where it's
she
at.
was a demon. On one occasion, the two got in an argument, and
Well,
he
when do you think
spat
you'd be
in
ready to
her
get started?
face. So it was time for Thuri Thor to get
Thursday?
her
Okay, so
actual
Thursday
revenge.
is the 28th.
He basically countersued the Reverend. He said he'd spent years hurling false allegations at
Well,
her
let me go
family and had caused the unjust
Would
death
you be
of her
interested in being
father
here
and
too?
brother.
Yeah. All right.
Most of her
Let
family's
me go
estate
ask.
had been given to the Reverend over charges that she claimed were
Now,
meaningless.
if it's here,
At trial, she
we'll
said
just
that the
start waiting
Reverend
until Monday.
never showed mercy against her
Having
family.
somebody move
So
from
why should the
here
court
to
show
Telegraph on
mercy
Monday, so.
against him?
Let me see.
Unfortunately, no one really knows the
I know
outcome of
busy
this
as hell,
trial.
so.
People generally believe Thuri Thor to have won. There was no evidence of her having ever practiced witchcraft. Thuri Thor was well liked by the public, while they increasingly looked on the Reverend with disdain. She also had very influential prosecutors on her side. It's likely she won, but we don't know what she won. Thuri Thor's name appeared in a 1703 census, showing that she lived to be at least 65. The Reverend grew impoverished and likely disgraced as he aged, though he eventually moved into Kirkubul farmhouse. There he died at age 86. People have provided
We can do
many
Monday.
theories for different
Here.
diseases that the Reverend Yon may have suffered.
So Monday would be the
No
second.
one really knows what caused his painful episodes, but most scholars agree that Yon was not mentally within full capacity. Regardless, his writings and the court records surrounding the Kirkubul affair provide a singular and detailed account on how witch trials
You come right in the
operated
same front
Iceland.
door. Okay. All right.
The historical
You said you want to do direct deposit, so I'm going to send you that
consequences
email
of
real
Icelandic
quick.
witchcraft
You do it while
are
you're
certainly
doing it. You
interesting.
get it.
However, now that we understand to a degree the era in which all of this took place, we can get into the technical details and methods of Icelandic magic. There are a number of Icelandic books that contain lore, spell work, or other forms
14.
of magical tradition. There are books
Your
from
chances of getting
John
hired
the
in
Learned, which
quicker
contains spells and rune work.
here.
There's an Icelandic
Not many
physician's
people.
manual from 1400,
As long
which
as you
contains distinctly magical
show some
remedies for
initiative and show up
ailments
every day,
invoking Odin, Thor, and Freya. There are dozens of such materials, which are mostly piecemeal
I'm
and
going to be able to do it right
incomplete
now. I
just
got to
by
reset
virtue
the
of
password for
time.
that. All right. But
one
yeah, I'll send it
spellbook
to you.
does
If you don't get it, I mean, we've
fully
got
intact.
literally, if you start next Monday, your
Indeed,
first check
the
wouldn't be
most
till the Friday
important
after
and
that.
most famous of all Icelandic.
So we have time to get that set up. But as of right now, yeah, we have you set up for Monday.
Given the historical context,
Any questions or anything like that,
it's
just shoot me a
truly
text to the
remarkable
office
that
number,
Galdra
the highlighted
book
number on the
survived.
back.
Written sometime in the latter 1500s, this book
good
is an
luck.
index of 47 spells. It was likely assembled by a combination of Icelandic magicians and
Nice meeting you
Danish
too, sir.
scribes during the Protestant period. 1682, the book was acquired by a Danish philologist before being transferred to Stockholm and included in the National Academy of Sciences. This is where it lives today. This book offers no editorializing or opinioning about magic, but rather just the specific incantations, spells, theology of early Icelandic sorcerers. The spells in the Galdra book cover a diverse range of ends. The most common is that of protection. 18 of the spells promise protection from some harm, be that magic or man. 9 spells promise good fortune in one way or the other. 6 spells offer protection against thieves, a concern which seemed quite important to the authors. 1 final spell provides invisibility. These spells together are pretty harmless. They are mostly positive in nature, I think. But besides these, The Galderbok offers darker forms of magic. These range from low-level mischief, there's a spell to make the victim art, to more malevolent. One kills another's livestock.
Okay, so
Another
let me
forces
load
a
some
woman
things,
to
and we're
fall
going to
in
load the
love.
forms for you.
There is also a surprising amount of Christianity in the spell book. 9 of the spells have a paradoxically Christian framework in that they cite Christian works or ask for assistance from Christian figures. 8
There is
spells
a note in
express some
here
kind of
about
Judeo-Gnostic roots.
Facebook
5
messages.
still
Something you
overtly
left
mix
last time?
Christianity with Germanic paganism.
Derogatory Facebook messages.
When combined with other Icelandic sources, the Galderbok also outlines a theology of pagan gods, goddesses, and demons. In Icelandic magic, a number of deities are specifically invoked.
Oh.
Odin, Thor, Frigg, and Baldur, among others.
Love it.
Loki also makes frequent appearances. Many spells make references to trolls or elves that could be responsible for fulfilling magical spells. Giants are mentioned twice. Valhall, the dwelling place for honorific warriors who die in battle, also appears in the Galderbok. Interestingly, demonic figures from Christianity also find themselves invoked in the book. In spell 43, the invocation is, "Help me in this, all you gods, Thor, Odin, Frigg, Freya, Satan, Beelzebub, and all those gods and goddesses who dwell in Valhall." The fact that Satan has come to Valhall is remarkable. It shows the increasing fusion between Christianity and the old pagan religion. The true purpose of this, though, was to literally demonize old pagan gods.
We don't want that to happen with you.
Traditional Icelandic pagan gods are not categorically good or evil.
A lot of the cookies that we
This
had.
dichotomy doesn't really exist in the way that Christianity offers it between Satan and Jesus. But as time went on, Christians began to assign pagan gods into these roles. More specifically, the old gods found home among Satan rather than Jesus. Aggressive and dark magic would be more likely to invoke the name of pagan gods. On the other hand, Christian elements appeared overwhelmingly in protective spells. As ever in Iceland, this didn't take root as firmly as it did in other places. The Icelandic trinity of Germanic pagan gods, Christian entities, and Christian demons remained in place.
Okay. Click on
pagan deities never
log in and
became
log back
entirely
in.
evil, and Christian entities were never accepted as wholly good. We've talked at length about methodology and technique and even spell books, but there is one distinct question that comes to mind still. How did Icelandic sorcerers believe magic actually worked? Through what powers, forces, or entities did they believe their magical ends were fulfilled? Well, most likely, they didn't really think much about it. If their spell worked, it worked, and that was enough. But by reading between the lines of these spell books, we can kind of understand the causality to which Icelandic sorcerers attributed their work. The most pronounced is willpower. Icelandic magic often seemed to function on a sort of uber-concentrated version of one's will. Really, willpower is something like the foundation for the entirety of Icelandic magic and much of other European brands of witchcraft. Many spells feature instructions to that point, telling the practitioner to have a strong faith or say what you desire with anger. Other spells implore the magician to skip prayers in the evening so that their day wouldn't have a sort of close. In this way, the practitioner's willpower and train of thought wouldn't be interrupted by any sort of psychological conclusion to the day. Other spells still required the user to fast or undergo physical hardship with the idea that discomfort could further concentrate one's emotions. This willpower would then be converted into something more mystical via runes, incantations, human blood, or a mixture of these things. These implements serve to transmit one's will from shallow desire into magic. The historical aspect of Icelandic witchcraft is fascinating, undoubtedly. But just as interesting is the way early pagan traditions have persisted within Iceland today. It would be simply outlandish to categorize Iceland as even a remotely pagan society today. Christianity is the dominant religion, and in some surveys, Iceland ranks highly among non-religious nations. But early Icelandic traditions have persisted in ways rarely seen across other developed countries. Icelandic Ásatrúarfélagið, or Ásatrú, is a neo-pagan religion that was founded in 1972 and still enjoys significant membership in the country. Indeed, it is the largest non-Christian religion in Iceland, though still a distant second. While not inherently linked to witchcraft or magic really in any way, the neo-pagan religion provides a fascinating bridge between ancient and modern Iceland. Before I proceed, there is unfortunately an elephant in the room of Ásatrú that I must address. Icelandic Ásatrú is a non-political movement. It is not a right-wing movement in any way, shape, or form. Outside of Iceland, certain people in America and Europe have stolen the name of Ásatrú to create their own hateful organizations which have no relation to or basis in the Icelandic Church. The Church itself has condemned the use of Ásatrú in pursuit of any hateful, supremacist, or race-based ideology. On the contrary, Icelandic Ásatrú has been characterized by scholars as open-minded, and the Church itself is involved in vaguely left-wing
you're just doing them individually?
causes. But again, it is not an inherently political
It doesn't check
organization.
them if you do it like
In
that.
the early 70s, a group of Icelanders were increasingly dissatisfied with having to pay taxes to the Christian Church. The group was interested instead in establishing a religion that was more in touch with traditional Icelandic culture and the natural landscape of the island. A group of like-minded individuals gathered around this idea, and in 1972, the religion was officially established. The following year, Ásatrú was officially recognized by the Icelandic government. At the first meeting in 1973, there were 21 members. This number immediately began to grow, and today there are over 5,700 Icelanders practicing Ásatrú. Modern Ásatrú cannot entirely recreate the old ways. For one thing, the ancient Nordic religious practices varied by time, place, and social environment. Moral attitudes have also changed. Human sacrifice is certainly unacceptable. Animal sacrifice, likewise. In Norse sagas, it was common to sprinkle blood over a group of people during ceremonies. Today, this would be messy at best and quite dangerous at worst. Today, Ásatrú weaves together a tapestry of elements from pre-Christian Iceland. Though it is a religion with a temple and high priests and regular ceremonies, Ásatrú exists more within diversity than dogma. Participants don't worship a strict pantheon of gods, nor do they follow a meta-narrative of creation or eventual salvation. Instead, they find the sacred in values, traditions, and myths associated with the most ancient Icelandic texts. Also sacred are the history and cultural heritage from these times. Ásatrú further preaches a reverence for the forces of nature that have historically been imagined or experienced as supernatural. Together, these things comprise the Ásatrú idea of vor siður, or our custom, which is a foundation of pride and inspiration for the religion. Ásatrú represents a small portion of the Icelandic population, and I should not overstate its relevance
up here,
to modern
his
Iceland.
other names, put N/A.
Be responsible to speak
Also
in
for
such
carbon
broad
number.
strokes, to say that modern Iceland is an island of pagans, despite it once perhaps having deserved that title long ago. Within any nation, the experiences of individuals will vary. There are Icelanders who feel a deep connection to
Apartment number, yeah.
Christian
Yeah, for some reason, all those blanks
but
on
others
top have to be-
probably don't care at all, or would be happy to forget about these traditions entirely. It is a fact, though, that Iceland's pagan history has survived into modernity in ways rarely seen throughout other developed nations. Through its reverence for pagan, pre-Christian aspects of Icelandic history, Ásatrú provides us with a profound link to this past and to this
You good?
culture.
You don't have an email?
I do.
While the events discussed
I mean, that's how
in
we
this video
communicate with
certainly
you.
contributed to historical
I mean, it's
paganism
all right.
and witchcraft within
We'll add it later.
Iceland, there are other factors we should look at as well.
There's rules there.
Perhaps most
Which we're gonna-
foundationally, we should examine the landscape itself. Iceland is a dramatic, harsh, and unforgiving place. It is battered by the ice-cold waters and storms of the North Atlantic. It is a land of radical polarities. On the island, you can find both volcanoes and glaciers. Quite literally, it is a land of fire and ice. Winters are long, summers, if you could call them that, disappear as quickly as they arrive. Spring and autumn are essentially non-existent. Farmable land is rare, and livestock struggles to find reasonable grazing space. Between earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, it is a place where the earth regularly shakes and rumbles. These natural forces all compete for the lion's share of hardship and suffering inflicted on the island's population. Iceland squeezes and demands the most from its inhabitants. In a time before modern technology, the idea of magic would have been very helpful in simply surviving. The spells outlined by Icelandic text do not express any interest in the metaphysical or unlocking profound secrets to man's existence. Rather, they offer solutions to life's then everyday problems. Here's how to avoid thieves. Here's how to catch more fish. Here's how to protect yourself from danger. These solutions would have felt incredibly useful to old world Icelanders. Perhaps because of this necessity, Icelandic magic seems tremendously accessible. There were some particularly ambitious individuals who devoted their lives wholly to sorcery. But broadly, old Icelandic magic could be practiced by just about anyone. There was rarely ever mention for the need of intense training. The implements required by these spells were largely commonplace enough. Iceland is also the only country where witch-burning records reveal a significant possession of magic books among victims who again were almost exclusively of the lower classes. This further tells us that access to magical knowledge was not just the purview of some elite priestly people. Instead, it was uniquely widespread among common Icelanders. It is not just magical knowledge that has a strong tradition in Iceland, but all knowledge. Iceland was originally settled by the cultural conservatives of Norway. That is to say, people who had great interest in preserving Norwegian, now Icelandic, cultural heritage. When Christianity arrived, it brought opportunities to learn. People entered into formal scholarly pursuits through new churches, schools, or journeys abroad. The foundation of curiosity, combined with this new opportunity for knowledge, meant Iceland generated a remarkable level of national intellectualism. Even today, Iceland consistently ranks highly in literacy rate and education levels. The country boasts the highest rate of books published per capita anywhere in the world. Of course, there are other factors at play here, but this love of academia can be traced right back to the country's founding. Throughout its history, Icelandic people have demonstrated an intense resilience, whether that has been to the very nature of their landscape or external political forces. Many of Iceland's cultural values only seem to have been strengthened by forces that could have ripped them apart entirely. And indeed, we end up with a culture that has been actively explored, recorded, and preserved by its people. Today, we are shockingly well informed about historical magic in Iceland. But still, to truly understand Iceland's history of magic, perhaps any history of anything, there is one more thing we must be sure to keep in mind. As we examine history, especially when that history leans so heavily on stuff we don't really believe in anymore, we should remember perspective. It's easy for us to wave our hands dismissively at every mention of sorcery and witchcraft. Within our rational, science-loving society, we can look at the idea of magic quite casually. But context is important. In early Iceland, people did not believe magic was real. It was just real. To them, it was not a matter of belief at all. Witchcraft wasn't something you believed in. It was fact, in the same way that today, this is red and this is blue, this is the moon and this is the sun. It's important to consider this context and look at these traditions through this lens. With this empathy, we can achieve a truly authentic view of our world as it once was.
Cool.
Yeah.
1890. The building I'm in is older than that. 1840 it was built in. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and kill the stream, guys. I got buried in shit. I haven't been able to pay much attention since about halfway through this, so thought it was cool and interesting stuff that we reviewed today, though. So let's do this thing. Peace.
I see her rolling up, Uber black Cadillac, high heel boots and a sexy body full of tats. Baby's bad, oh baby's hella bad. After her there ain't no coming back. Wanna take a run at that. I think she's feeling me, turn it up a few degrees. My imagination of her body gets the best of me. Oh gosh, she's such a tease, bitten lips, bruised knees. I'm addicted to her, need her touching me. Cause she got a bad little waist, and we tearing down this place. Off the liquor that we chase, Casamigos to the face. Baby, I don't need no space. Coming closer for a taste, and I'll show you how I make everything just fade away. Cause she's like sex, drugs, cocaine, body so insane. Jealous of the clothing that she wears up on that tight frame. All game, no shame, baby came here to play. I feel like an addict cause she's sex, drugs, cocaine. Got a fine little body and her mind's kinda naughty. They say that once you taste it, you cannot replace it. She could get you high, all the dopamine inside triggers fast once she's naked. Her body's a creation. They say the devil made her for his entertainment, but even he couldn't learn how to contain it. Her high heels make a damn good statement. There is no replacement, a body by Satan. Cause she got a bad little waist, and we tearing down this place. Off the liquor that we chase, Casamigos to the face. Baby, I don't need no space. Coming closer for a taste, and I'll show you how I make everything just fade away. Cause she's like sex, drugs, cocaine,